morning. I call this hearing of the Senate Communications and Technology Committee to order, and I would like to welcome everyone to the first of 4 hearings of the Communications and Technology Committee to discuss how we can better improve access to high-speed broadband internet throughout the Commonwealth. And I will say to all of you today, you might want to put your cell phones on either turn them off or put them on airplane mode, because there is no Wi-Fi here and there's also no cellular connectivity, and you'll probably drain your battery. So we were going to live stream this hearing. Unfortunately, that's not possible, but we will be recording it and for your viewing pleasure later on this afternoon when we get connected. So I'd also like to take a moment and thank Senator Joe Pittman for offering to host this important hearing in beautiful Indiana County. And it's this is the most perfect location to kick off these hearings. So again, we're sitting here right now, only 15 minutes away from downtown Indiana, and we don't have access to high-speed internet. A stark difference really drives the point home that this is an issue that impacts the entire state, no matter who or where you are. It's been over 2 years since I wrote a column in my hometown newspaper entitled "Closing Pennsylvania's Digital Divide," where I had reviewed promises that were made and promises that were broken by companies who years ago pledged to make high-speed internet available to everyone in the Commonwealth. That editorial became a call to arms to address this critical issue here in the state, and we're beginning to see progress. This time last year, the number we were all using was 800,000. That's the number of people believed to not have access to high-speed internet in our Commonwealth. Thanks to the Center for Rural PA, which is testifying here today, they have revealed that only a small portion of Pennsylvania meets the Federal Communication Commission's minimum speed for broadband, 25.3 megabytes per second. The number of people without access or have a discrepancy in actual speeds versus advertised speeds is in the millions. Marginal broadband connectivity is a Commonwealth-wide problem, but the issue becomes exceedingly worse in places like Indiana and throughout most of rural Pennsylvania. And that is why I knew it was imperative to hold these hearings with the committee to begin to examine the problem and find workable solutions. This particular hearing will dive deeper into workforce development, job creation, and local government perspectives. We know that in order to attract businesses to the state and keep our young people, we need to ensure there is adequate access to high-speed internet. And I had the brief opportunity to talk with some school board directors from Senator Pittman's alma mater, and they shared that exact problem with me. Additionally, there's only so much that we can do at the state level, and therefore hearing from local officials is a vital component of the discussion as we begin to look for solutions. So before we kick things off with our first panel, I wanted to give Chairman Sanacero an opportunity to give us some welcoming remarks.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I appreciate that, and I want to thank you for being such a force on this issue in Harrisburg. This hearing and the 2 that follow are further evidence of that. I have always been someone who has felt pretty strongly about the need to invest in infrastructure. And often when we think about infrastructure, we think about roads and bridges, and we're right to do so. Just on the way in, I saw there was a culvert being replaced a couple miles down the road. And we also sometimes think about school infrastructure, which is something else we need to be doing here in Pennsylvania, because we have a lot of schools that are in dire need of that. But not so often do people think about broadband when they think about infrastructure, and that might be partly because even though we are now fully immersed in the internet and connectivity, it is still relatively recently in our experience that we have that. And so as a consequence, a lot of these issues are not issues that typically get the kind of attention that they need to get. That statistic is of 800,000 Pennsylvanians who do not have access to broadband is a significant one, and it's something that I think should make everyone in the legislature and outside the legislature aware and desiring to do something about it. So I think these hearings are certainly a good step in that direction. It's important for us as policymakers to get input on not just the data, but also how the lack of this broadband connectivity impacts communities throughout Pennsylvania. So I'm looking forward to that discussion. And again, I want to thank you for bringing this forward. I want to thank Senator Pittman for hosting, and for Indiana County, this very nice park and this facility. And it does indeed lack connectivity here. So I think an appropriate location for a hearing today. Thank you.
Most certainly. Thank you, Chairman Santicero. I'd also like to take a moment for members of the committee, as well as some of our local state representatives who have been kind enough to join us, to introduce themselves. If we could start with Representative Dush.
Thank you, Senator Hill, and welcome to the 66th District, the land of lush forests and bountiful streams in the middle of a broadband desert. I want to thank Senator Hill. She came in with me in the House, and she seized the lead on this issue in the House, and it's nice to see her continuing with that effort in the Senate. I'm very grateful for this hearing, and I think it's very appropriate that you kick it off here. Senator Pittman and I both know that our constituents are in dire need of this type of attention to get the service for our students that are out there trying to do their homework now that's so much more internet-based, as well as state agencies that are requiring now forms to be filed online when our businesses don't have the ability to actually have access to the internet in order to do that. But again, welcome to the 66th Legislative District. You're in the most southwestern corner of my district. And Representative Struzzi's going to be talking later, but he's right across the hill here from me.
Hi, I'm State Senator Scott Hutchinson, 21st Senatorial District. I also represent a quite rural district that includes all or part of 5 counties. I have Warren, Forest, Venango, Clarion, and a big portion of Butler counties. It's a pleasure to be here to hear about this very, very important topic. I want to thank Senator Kristen Phillips-Hill, as well as Senator Pittman for his hosting this today, and it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Senator Joe Pittman. I'm the host senator, if you will. I first and foremost want to thank all of my colleagues for taking the time to be here this morning. I fully understand how difficult it is to schedule travel arrangements and whatnot, and so thank you for being here. As it's been mentioned, this is a critical issue. It's a very important issue. This is a real problem that real people face every day, not just here in Blue Spruce Park. We're not unique to what we see throughout rural Pennsylvania, and I hope we can leave this hearing with some clear and concise action items to move forward. We've been talking about the problem for many years. We know what the problem is. It's time we come up with some solutions. And while I know that invariably those solutions will involve a financial component and the need for additional resources to resolve the problem, I think we also have to address the functional bureaucratic problems that we have and that our providers have with trying to enter the market and become a competitor within the marketplace to provide the service. So I truly thank you for being here. I thank you for your time, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you.
My name is Jay Costa. I represent the city of Pittsburgh and Allegheny County in the state Senate. It's great for me to be back to Indiana. Spent a number of years here as a student in IUP and proud graduate. Spent some time in this park for a couple concerts, I think, back in the day, as I'm sitting here thinking. I want to thank Senator Phillips-Hill for conducting today's hearing, also the ones that will be coming later over the course of the next several weeks, because they really are important. I'm in the city of Pittsburgh. I represent that community, and we don't deal with the challenges that many folks in this room and many folks across rural Pennsylvania deal with. So it was important for me to want to hear exactly what some of the nature of the problems are, so we can continue to work together. We know that there needs to be a partnership that we have to develop between the state and entities that provide the broadband, and figure out a way to make it happen. My hope is that technology improves sufficiently to allow us to be in a position to be able to do it more expeditiously, and my hope is that we can provide support along those lines. So thank you for having me, and I look forward to hearing what's going to take place today.
Good morning. State Representative Jim Struzzi. As Representative Dush said, I represent the district, basically covering Indiana Borough IUP. So I sort of have a mixed emotions on this whole issue, because some of our people have broadband, but you can go 5 miles down the road and people don't. So it's a perplexing problem, and I think it's something that, I have 4 kids at home. They throw a fit when they can't get Wi-Fi in certain parts of the house. So I think for today's generations, it's really, it's an expectation, but it's also a necessity. And we have to look at it as a necessity when we're trying to attract people to these rural parts of Pennsylvania, to rural parts of Indiana County. Families aren't going to move here if their children can't access broadband. So I want to thank Senator Phillips-Hill and the panel for being here today. I want to thank Joe for hosting this and including our state representatives as well. I look forward to hearing all that you have to say, and I agree with Senator Costa. I believe that this can be solved through innovation and technology. I think we're on the cusp of doing all of that without having to hardwire everything. But what do we need to get over that threshold so that we can meet this need? And I say it's a need because it truly is a deterrent to growing our economy here in Pennsylvania. So I thank you for being here, and I welcome this opportunity to be part of this panel. So thank you.
Thank you. And thank you to all of you who are here today. It's very gratifying to see a packed house for a Senate hearing, so really appreciate your attendance. And now to our first panel.
Before we do that, I just want to acknowledge we have another colleague from the General Assembly here, my former colleague from the House, Jeff Pyle. Jeff, I see him back there.
Hey, Jeff.
I appreciate the invitation. You could have told me it was a televised code. You now sit in my old district here at Blue Spruce, and the problem is rather evident. We know where we got to get. Now we got to figure out how to get it. I listened with great interest in that this is an issue that comes up quite frequently in the 60th legislative, which, by the way, I left a half hour ago to get in here. My GPS is now giving me 3 different sets of ways to get here. Thank you very much for the invitation. I look forward to the testimony now.
Yes. Representative Pyle, it is always a pleasure to be in your company, and you are most welcome to join us here regardless of your attire, because your input is always, always informative, important, and appreciated. So please.
If I did have broadband, you could have emailed.
And I'd also like to note that Representative Bob Brooks has joined us as well. So it truly is a packed house, and grateful to be in Indiana. And welcome to our first panel. Joining us today is Commissioner Norm Kennard from the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission, Mr. Barry Dank, Director of the Center for Rural Pennsylvania, Mrs. Sherry Collins, Acting Executive Director for the Governor's Office of Broadband Initiatives, Mr. Frank Budzlowski, Director of Government Relations for Verizon, and Steve Samara, President of the Pennsylvania Telephone Association. So we'll start with your opening remarks, and I would ask you, if you could, please summarize as much as possible so that we have ample time. It's a packed house with a lot of members who I'm sure have really important questions to ask. So thank you very much. Commissioner Kennard.
Senator, thank you. Chairman, thank you. Members of the committee, thank you. Leader Costa, thank you for the opportunity. I and the PUC greatly appreciate the opportunity to present to you here today. Pennsylvania is at a critical stage in its decades-long efforts Senator Pittman mentioned years, it's been decades. I have background in, I filed pre-filed testimony, which is 28 pages, so I won't read it, but it lays out some of my 30 years plus worth of credentials in this area. And I feel that we are at a critical stage in terms of the speeds that are being demanded, the way the internet has penetrated our lives, and the need for a variety of different purposes for broadband. In the testimony, it is long. I think there's like 50 footnotes. I'm a lawyer. I apologize. I can't help myself. But I just wanted to present something that was kind of academic. It could be a background piece that you could use to source different ideas, what other states have done, academic studies on penetration levels, and so forth. So I think, in my opinion, having reviewed all this, Pennsylvania is way behind in terms of having a program and funding sources for rural broadband. As a Commonwealth, we need to update our legal definition from 1995 of what broadband is. And we need to expand the solutions beyond the traditional telephone companies. Having said that, I want to commend Sherry Collins and the Governor's Office of Broadband Policy for their participation in the recent bidding process that we went through for CAF II money, where they brought Tri-County Electric Co-op in the northern tier into the ISP business. Fiber to the home for approximately 9,500 customers at 1 gig service in Powder County across the northern tier is quite an accomplishment. And I applaud them for their efforts to present the funding necessary to bring that service to the northern tier. We need, however, in my opinion, to find a broader shared consensus on at least 5 issues. The first is we need a consensus on the need for and benefits of rural broadband. I think that consensus has been shaped, but we need to affirm it. And we need to affirm it by acknowledging the fact that we're going to have to spend public money to get there. We thirdly need a mapping base that identifies the communities that are the most underserved. Fourthly, we need a means of deployment that is technology neutral and presents solutions that are meaningful. And fifthly, we need a way to economically sustain these networks so we're not wasting taxpayer money. To Leader Costa's point, we need to assemble a diverse group of community leaders, economic development groups, educators, healthcare administrators, internet service providers, government agencies, and technical advisors to make this work. This is bigger than anybody in this room, and it's such a required diversity of input, opinion, knowledge base that really this is really going to take a large group. It's going to take a village of concerted effort. So in terms of the first one, the need for and benefits of rural broadband, it's beyond debate that broadband provides a host of benefits. The internet has radically transformed our lives: business, education, medicine, news and information, culture, politics, entertainment, and more. Access to the broadband, to the point made earlier, is no longer a want, it's a need. And it's particularly true of our rural communities. One thing I was reading over the weekend that really kind of drove home the real dilemma is that this country is in the midst of a historic surge in job growth. This is probably the second most sustained period of job growth we have ever had in this country. But the benefits are not being evenly distributed. There was a McKinsey report that came out in July that concluded that it's the mega cities, of which there's 25, that represent 30% of the population that have received better than twice that amount of the job creation. And the report further concludes that going forward, they're likely to continue to garner upwards of 60% of the job creation. By contrast, the rural areas with older, shrinking workforce, higher unemployment, lower education have hardly participated at all. To me, that's the dilemma on the economic side of this, which I understand is today's subject, that we really need to try to resolve. The McKinsey report suggests that rural areas adopt a strategy that includes expanding digital infrastructure. And I'm quoting here, providing backbone digital information will make remote working options feasible for more workers and make it possible for rural America to attract and retain more professionals. To that, I think everybody in the room agrees that that's exactly right. Now, having said that, do the rural communities want broadband? It may be good for them, but do they want it? I think the answer is yes, and increasingly is yes. But rural customer demand still lags customer behavior in other more populated areas. Age and income levels, factors that are indicative in a rural community, negatively affect customer demand for broadband, and it shows in the numbers. A recent Pew study noted that 78% of rural adult Americans currently use the internet at some speed. I'm not talking about real broadband, just at some speed, as opposed to 90% of the overall population. That's a real lag in demand, in my opinion. Interestingly, this study reveals that among senior citizens, only 66% currently go online. And another barrier that the Pew study found is cost, both the cost of owning your computer and the cost of the internet access itself. And finally, there are some people that will never go on the internet. They have no interest in doing so, or it's not relevant to their lives. In other words, rural acceptance is a challenge. This underscores the need for customer participation as we move through this process. Obviously, the greater the customer subscription rate, the profitability of any broadband deployment that we undertake will benefit. So for this reason, you should consider involving local leaders and community groups when considering specific projects. We also need to agree that public money is going to have to be spent here. I realize that's a subject being discussed now in Harrisburg, but carriers build where there's a profit. The easy and more profitable networks have already been built. The inescapable fact is that where there are fewer customers per mile of rural fiber or per wireless node, a business case can be not made where revenues cannot maintain the investment. So some level of external funding is going to be required to supplement ISP investment model. Finally, we need to economically sustain networks so that we're not wasting taxpayer money. I tend to side on the private networks are better than public networks, both from an operating and tax efficiency perspective. But this is me, I want to say this, me personally speaking here, not the commission. Public ISP systems do not have a favorable financial history. The University of Pennsylvania just recently undertook a study of there's 88 municipally owned fiber systems in this country. 20 of them present their financial results. 2 of them, of those 20, showed a profit. The rest are all underwater. Well, there's a subsidy going on among the taxpayer base that may or may not be acknowledged. So if a system is losing money, even if it's public system, it's going to be making up that difference somewhere, and the answer for a public system is going to be made up in the tax base. I also, in the testimony, spent a fair amount of time talking about the different mechanisms used in states to raise that money, be it a customer surcharge on telecommunications bill, be it like Indiana where it's toll revenues from one of their highways goes towards that amount, or if it's bond guarantees. There's any number of a variety of sources listed in my testimony for which you can choose to help provide that additional investment money that's needed to roll out rural broadband. So from the Commission's behalf, we don't strictly now have any jurisdiction over broadband or role in it. We do, however, have a lot of experience because of Chapter 30. And one way that we have found that we can become relevant is by encouraging and making it easier to attach the poles. That's where the cable goes up on the pole and goes down the side of the road. If that access is not, reasonably priced, if it's too difficult, if you get mired in bureaucracy, if it's not responsive, that cable doesn't go up. The FCC, Federal Communications Commission, for years has had that responsibility. We are in the process of opting out of that FCC federally driven process and bringing the rules and the process to Harrisburg so that attachers and pole owners both have a local magistrate, if you will, that can quickly hear the case. We have 20 ALJs. We have mediation process to try to expedite that process so where the money is available, the network is being built out, and it can be done more quickly and less expensively. So that concludes my remarks. Thank you. You are doing very important work. Expanding fast ISP service to rural communities is critical, and I appreciate your dedication to that, and we at the PUC stand ready to work with you in any way that we can.
Thank you, Commissioner Kennard. Director Day.
Good morning, Chairman Phillips-Hill, Chairman Centesero, members of the Senate Communications and Technology Committee, and members from the House of Representatives. Thank you very much for the invitation to be part of today's program. My written testimony is not quite as lengthy as the commissioners, but it's lengthy and detailed, and I promise you I'm going to summarize it. I and the Center for Rural Pennsylvania deal with data and we deal with research. My role, though, is to take that data and take that research and translate it into how it can educate and inform public policy decisions, particularly as it relates to the 3.4 million citizens of this Commonwealth who live in rural Pennsylvania. But as a lot of our research has demonstrated over the years, as rural goes, so goes the Commonwealth. And so data and research is relevant for the entire Commonwealth. We want Philly to survive as much as we want Potter County to survive. So with that, broadband connectivity is a critical part of our infrastructure, as you have stated. But unlike our bridges and highways, broadband is not readily visible to determine real access or real availability. But more and more, it is becoming the pathway for us to conduct business, to access health care, to engage in lifelong learning, to entertain and inform ourselves, and to interact with government, from income tax submission, grant applications, and now to participate in the 2020 census. So my written testimony cites several studies and several examples from testimony. I'm going to synthesize that down for a couple. But in terms of the sources I've used for my research, they've come from the American Farm Bureau Federation, the U.S. Departments of Education and Agriculture, Brookings Institution, the World Bank, Hudson Institute, and the U.S. News and World Report. Some quick examples. The 2019 Best States Report, published by U.S. News and World Report, ranked Pennsylvania's infrastructure as 29th in the nation. And within the category of infrastructure, internet access weighed 1/3 of the total score. And within internet access, Pennsylvania ranked 34th in the nation for broadband access. And in the Hudson Institute study entitled The Economic Impact of Rural Broadband, which was released in 2016, some quick findings are: rural broadband supported over $100 billion in e-commerce in 2015. And the rural broadband industry supported over 69,000 jobs in 2015. Rural broadband companies contributed over $24 billion to the economies of the states in which they operated in 2015. And of particular note for this conversation, and particularly for Pennsylvania, of that $24 billion, 66% of it accrued to the urban areas of those states. And for a state as diversified as Pennsylvania, as rural as Pennsylvania, as urbanized as Pennsylvania, if rural Pennsylvania succeeds, so will the wealth and the benefits succeed for the entire Commonwealth. The FCC argues that the economic payoff from investing to improve broadband access is even greater than other types of infrastructure investments. The center has held some hearings over the years, and I've attended some committee sessions over the years that have focused on broadband. I'm going to give you just a couple examples of testimony or comments made at those hearings to bring the issue down at the local grassroots level. We held a hearing on broadband specifically in Wellsboro 2018 on the issue of broadband. Among the 16 testifiers were a farmer, a doctor, an educator, and somebody who owns a business in the tourism industry. I highlight those examples because when you look at rural Pennsylvania in terms of its economies and the economic drivers and the economic employers, they are, without doubt, the top 5 include tourism, agriculture, healthcare, and education. And so some examples. Mr. Gerald Port owns a working 250-acre farm in Erie County. He does agritourism, he does a Christmas tree operation, and it also serves as a wedding venue. He testified that his internet speeds range from 1 to 2.5 megabytes. The lack of high-speed internet forces him to put all of his fiscal information on a thumb drive and to drive an hour to his accountant in order for his fiscal records to be taken care of. Dr. Brenda Freeman is the superintendent of the Wellsboro Area School District. She commented very favorably about the multiple ISPs that are available in her district that enable her and her teachers to address student demands for an educational environment that thrives in technology and the use of high-speed internet. And if you look at investment in broadband and technology over the years, particularly from the public sector, it has pretty much been siloed to education, healthcare, industrial parks, that type of thing. But stretching it out for the home, the Main Street business, has been a challenge. But she also commented that when students leave their classrooms, many of them have to power down because they don't have home access to high-speed internet. Parents then also don't have the ability to partner with the school on homework, grades, or even basic communication. She estimated that in her district, 30% of her area is underserved. And the Pew Research Center has called this the homework gap. And the FCC's Broadband Task Force report stated that 7 out of 10 teachers assign homework that requires broadband access. Terry Dennison spoke before a House Tourism and Recreation Committee. It was hosted by Senator Hutchinson as chairman of the Joint Legislative Committee. She talked specifically about the engaging and increasing role of bicyclists along Route 6. Route 6 is now called U.S. Bike Route 36, and it's now recognized as part of the national bike route system. One of the big challenges that bicyclists have is access to cell service and internet. They are used to wayfinding applications that help them with directions, side routes to visit areas of interest or attraction, to keep in touch with their family members, even to find repair shops. She said that is a major issue that they have to deal with along the entire 13-county Route 6 stretch. I think you all are aware of the June 2019 report that the center issued entitled Broadband Availability and Access in Rural Pennsylvania. It clearly stated that unfortunately the FCC's mapping stating that 100% availability across all of Pennsylvania of broadband speeds at the 25 megabyte level or greater just does not reflect accuracy. From the over 11 million tests that they conducted over 2018, coupled with an historical archive of 15 million tests, they were able to show that the disparity between rural Pennsylvania and urban Pennsylvania in terms of broadband access is getting even greater. So with regard to that research, I need to make this statement because there have been some concerns about the methodology of that research. In order to further explanation and refinement of that test data, the research team has freely and publicly released all of its data, its mapping and its methodologies, and scripts and visualization tools. They've produced an open and easily reproducible methodology in companion with experts in the field so that it can be used in other states and national efforts. And there's been comment about demand, customer demand, willingness to pay. We are now sponsoring a research study looking at willingness to pay and customer demand to help provide some quantifiable information, because that is a very critical component of this issue with broadband deployment. There are customers who are unwilling to pay the rates, and the demand of broadband access is not what we might think it should be or could be. So that's something that we're working on. I'll close with these comments. I would offer, from a public policy perspective, I think the Commonwealth must consider the opportunity cost that we continue to pay for not having high-speed access across this entire Commonwealth. That cost has definite impact on rural Pennsylvania. One example is the continuing outmigration of our youth. From the United States Census American Community Survey, a reported 20,000 rural youth ages 18 to 34 and not enrolled in school moved out of Pennsylvania in 2017. Some of those young adults, I would offer, could have been the next fire company or EMS volunteer, maybe run for borough or township office, be a United Way campaigner, or maybe even a successful entrepreneur. While the sole reason for that outmigration cannot be pinpointed on broadband, let me offer this for your consideration. We did a 4-year longitudinal study across rural Pennsylvania schools of middle and high school rural youth regarding their desires to remain in or return to rural Pennsylvania. It offers some insight. 43% of those students said the opportunity to start their own business would make staying in rural Pennsylvania a very attractive option. 60% of those who said they wanted or needed to move away to start a business or pursue an education wanted to move back to rural Pennsylvania when they started to raise their family. What was a critical factor in that decision-making process? Specifically, access to high-speed internet. Our work dealing with rural broadband dates back to 2003, when we published our first report, Broadband Internet Service in Rural and Urban Pennsylvania, a Commonwealth or a Digital Divide. Since then, we've continued our research and data analysis to help inform this major public policy situation. We continue to be at the service of the General Assembly. Thank you for this chance to be here today, and I'll participate in questions at the end.
Director Collins.
Good morning, Chairwoman. Thank you so much for having me here. Chairman Santasera, thank you, and members of this committee. I want to thank you for allowing me to be here this morning as well to participate in today's hearing. For the past 8 months, I have been working in the Governor's Office of Broadband Initiatives as its acting executive director. I am currently a Deputy Secretary with the Department of Community and Economic Development. I stepped away from that position to focus on this issue 100% of my time. There is a great deal of information that you will gather here this morning, and like I always like to say, the stories are the same. The communities change, the faces change, but the stories are consistently the same across the board, no matter where we are in rural Pennsylvania. I've had the opportunity to travel this Commonwealth for the last 15 years while at DCED. I've worked with businesses that are looking to grow and expand in Pennsylvania. I've worked with businesses that are coming from other states. I think that we can all agree Pennsylvania is a great place to work, to live, to play, and now I'm starting to sound like Deputy Secretary Lepore from our tourism office, but the reality is we all believe in Pennsylvania. If we didn't, we would not be sitting here today and testifying on this issue. This is probably the heaviest lift that any of us are going to work on in the next couple years. And some of us have been working on it for a number of years already. I recently was at the PSATS conference in Hershey this past year, and I distinctly remember turning around and looking at the board that said it's their 97th anniversary. And at that very moment, I had remarked that I hope that at the 100th year, we have started to figure this out, because this has been a long-standing issue. This is something that we've discussed, and we can no longer continue to kick this can down the road, quite frankly. Some of the comments that we've heard this morning are consistent with my own feelings. I, too, have children. We often have battles in the house because if one person is on an iPhone and I'm on my laptop doing Commonwealth work, or my husband's trying to do something, the service is very slow. I live in suburban Harrisburg. That should not be. So when we get out to places like Indiana and where we are today and other communities, it becomes increasingly more evident that people in the rural parts of Pennsylvania have no access. You know, we joked on the way up this morning about, oh, we just lost service. So my first call was going to be to Buzz. My second call was going to be to Dave Kerr at AT&T, but then they both synced at the same time, so I was in good shape. The reality is this is a major issue that we have. And in order for Pennsylvania to continue to be a competitive state, we need to address these infrastructure issues. Now, I'm certain that every member of this committee is very well aware of Governor Wolf's Restore Pennsylvania plan, and I am proud to say that I am a supporter of that. primarily because I believe it is the only way that we can amass the amount of funds that we need to address these issues. If you look at Texas, Pennsylvania is the second largest producer of natural gas in the United States. In 2018, Texas outpaced us in production, but brought in about $1.4 billion worth of severance tax. And those taxes were used to support infrastructure. In Pennsylvania, we have an impact fee, and yes, that impact fee has been extremely helpful in a lot of our communities. The challenge is that the impact fee for 2018 was roughly $209 million, compared to Texas's $1.4 billion in a severance tax. Now, I think it's safe to say that there are a lot of sensitivities around the severance tax, and I think that we appreciate that in the Wolf administration. But I think we also appreciate hearing from our community members and hearing from our leaders, talking with our county commissioners and our borough managers and mayors who tell us that this is one of their most critical issues in Pennsylvania. The County Commissioners Association of Pennsylvania has taken this up as one of their top priorities. The National Association of County Commissioners looks at this across the entire country as being a major priority as well. And I think that Pennsylvania is at that inflection point. We have an opportunity to be a leader in this. We have the opportunity to identify a way in which to address some of these issues. Now, Restore is not just about broadband, as most of you know. Restore is also about fixing some of our other infrastructure issues. It's time that we take a serious look at this. We recognize, again, that Restore may not work for everyone, and I appreciate that. But unless we come up with another solution that is going to generate the same amount of capital that we need to fix these infrastructure issues, I'm not sure how it gets done. And that is the challenge that we have before us. To the point earlier, it's going to take collaboration, it's going to take cooperation, and a lot of relationship building. This is not something that can be done at the administration level on its own. It's not something that our legislative members can do on their own. We need the support of one another, and more importantly, we need the support of the providers, some of them who are here today. We also have in the room this morning some of our economic development partners from CEDACOG, the Northwest Commission, and of course, the North Central Regional Planning and Development Commission. They are critical partners as we identify some of these solutions. Our Telephone Association members, our Broadband Cable Association members, and of course, our wireless providers are also part of this solution. It's going to take a lot of work, a lot of cooperation to get it done. So of course today I am thrilled to be here. I'm happy to answer any questions. I don't want to belabor my testimony because quite frankly, both Commissioner Kennard and Barry Dank have said it well. We have a lot of statistical information that backs up the need for this. We can talk about story after story. My testimony shares with you some of the things that we've talked about over the last 8 months as well. Our school students are of most critical importance right now as we have our children sitting at home during summer break. I have my 10-year-old and I'm constantly sharing information with Leighton about why it's important to keep up your studies over the summertime. You know, you're going to be going back to school in a couple weeks. And it takes me back to a moment when I was in Tri-Valley a couple months ago in Sullivan County. And we were walking through the schoolyard, and the administrator came over and said, "Hey, this young woman over here would like to talk to you. She said that you will be a superhero in her mind if she can get broadband at home." See, they have no connectivity where she lives. And so the only opportunity to actually connect to the internet is when she's at school. So I ask you, what happens to those students during the summer months when they no longer have that ability? They may be using school-utilized laptops to connect, but they're also utilizing the school's infrastructure. And so when those students are at home, they have nothing. They might be able to get to the local library, but if they're like most families, mom and dad are at work and don't necessarily have the opportunity to do that. And so I just ask of this committee to be open-minded, to continue conversations with the administration, to continue to look at ways in which to support this initiative so that we can actually bring broadband to all Pennsylvanians who want access to it. We're in the 21st century, and again, we are at a critical inflection point to do something that is transformational to support this Commonwealth. So I thank you, Chairwoman, again for having me here today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Samara.
Thank you, Chairman, our host, Senator Pittman, and the rest of the legislators that are here. Great bench. It's great to see a lot of folks here from the legislature, and great to see a lot of folks here in the audience. It's heartening to see a good turnout here. And Buzzy, I had 2 bars the whole way up, so just so you know, I had 2 bars the whole way here. So
Cell bars. You might want to clarify that.
ours is bars.
Just for the record.
I'm not going to match, like the previous 2 panelists, not going to match Commissioner Kennard's 28 pages of written testimony, but you have my testimony. You can read that at your leisure. I'm mystified as to why anyone would spend their leisure time reading it, but that's your call. You can read it if you like. But with the Pennsylvania Telephone Association, just want to explain a little bit about who we are for folks who don't know. PTA represents about 30 RLECs, rural local exchange carriers. They range in size from a couple hundred access lines to a couple 100,000 access lines, so run all across the gamut. They are all COLR, or providers, carriers of last resort, which means they have to serve for basic service throughout their service territories. And because of Act 183 of 2004, they have to provide broadband throughout their service territories. Now, don't snicker. This act is 15 years old. Back then, broadband was 1.544 meg. So that was the bar back 15 years ago. They've all met that and exceeded it in many cases, as we'll talk about a little bit here. But you need the basic service that my member companies provide to get the bells and whistles of broadband. You need that to get, you know, all the good stuff. So in order to provide affordable basic service over the years, what Pennsylvania has done is, and at the federal level as well, is set up a universal service fund so that someone who lives in a very rural part of the Commonwealth doesn't pay cost just for dial tone. That could range anywhere from $75 a month or more. The universal service funds help to subsidize or support that, and we have worked assiduously the past couple sessions to make sure that the Pennsylvania USF stays in place, because if that goes away, we have not only problems with basic service being affordable, but also providing broadband service as well. Our challenges, as a couple of the previous panelists have suggested, cost to serve in these areas. At the end of the day, you need to make a business case to get broadband out to rural parts of the Commonwealth, quite frankly. And take rates, as Barry had mentioned, have not been terrific. That probably won't resonate with anyone in this room. You're all here because you're interested in having broadband and interested in having faster speed. But quite frankly, if we get half of the people that we provide broadband to signing up, that's probably a good day. I have one small company who still offers service at the lower end of the scale in addition to much, much faster service. As of last year, they had about 25% of the people, their customers on broadband, were subscribing to 1.544 meg. So I may get some snickers, but honestly, there are a lot of folks still signed up for that service. It may be generational, it may be something else, you don't know. Again, it doesn't resonate with a lot of people because it doesn't seem fast enough to do the things you need to do. But in a real business case scenario, that's what you see with some of my smaller member companies. I have another member company who, when they come out and offer broadband, they will offer most of their speeds from 3 meg to 25 meg at the same price. And they still see a lot of people taking the 3 meg service. Some of that is on us, you know, we got to advertise, we got to get it out there. Some of it is just educating people about the benefits of it. But from a real case scenario, that is what you're seeing. So those are the challenges that we have as rural local exchange carriers in Pennsylvania. What we've done. Some of my member companies have taken Connect America Fund money, which is federal money that comes down to deploy broadband. USDA has offered money to do that, hundreds of millions of dollars. Sounds like a lot of money. It's spread across the nation. It is a lot of money. It's not going to get it done in Pennsylvania because to get to the faster speeds, you need a lot of money to get that done. So one of my member companies had participated in Governor Wolf's first tranche of working with PennDOT to draw down some federal money to do that. That's still rolling out, but any initiative like that, we are interested in taking a look at because it's unique, it's partnering, whether it's partnering with other utilities, whether it's partnering with the public sector. we're all ears when it comes to that type of stuff. So that's something that one of my member companies has taken advantage of. At the regulatory level, and Commissioner Kennard alluded to this a little bit earlier, we're looking at pole attachments. Pole attachments are a big deal for my guys. It costs a lot of money sometimes to get on these poles. And we are not the owners of all these poles. We own some of them. But when you want to get on a pole and it's going to cost you 5 figures for make-ready work and maybe 6 figures for a project, the money you're getting from the federal government or from other sources to deploy broadband doesn't add up. Doesn't make economic sense for us to do that. So what we commented to the PUC was, and I'm hoping to see something out of the commission fairly shortly, is let's have a local cop on the beat. You know, the folks that own these poles know that you have to go to the FCC to get anything done. A lot of my member companies don't have the resources or time to go and do that. Pole owners know that. They come up with a price, and the price is what the price is. Either pay it or you don't deploy broadband. So that's a very important thing for us to get done. We are hoping the commission rules on that and takes ownership of oversight of those types of things. Also pending at the commission is a dereg docket. We are still in many regards still regulated like we were when we were monopolies. As Buzz will tell you, those days are a distant memory. You can't even see them in the rearview mirror any longer. It's a very competitive environment, but we're still regulated essentially like we were 40 years ago. So we're trying to eliminate some of those costs that are associated with the regulations. Looking forward, again, we need to make a business case to make this attractive for the RLECs to do it. Some of the things we've been looking at, and I think we'll be talking to the chairman about in your committee, is cost sharing for infrastructure moves on PennDOT projects. When PennDOT comes out and says, we need to build a bridge, we need to build a road, we need you to move your poles for us to do that, my guys eat the cost for doing that. There's not one dime of that money that helps the customer. There's not one dime of that money that goes to broadband. That is money we eat and pay for. It helps the motoring public, obviously. It doesn't help with our customers as far as the service they're getting from us. So that's something we'd like to investigate with you folks. We'd also like a fair base for the gross receipts tax. The gross receipts tax base has been broadened rather dramatically over the years. It is a tax on telecommunications messages. It has been broadened over the years to include lots of different things. Both Verizon and some of my member companies have been in court all the way up to the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania to try and get some answers to some of these things. It's another big ticket item that takes money away from doing the things that we'd like to be doing, which is addressing the rural broadband problem in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So in addition to the regulatory things we've been working on and the legislative things, we're interested in pursuing those with you. It's not just money issues, plain and simple. There are other things that we can be looking at, both legislatively and regulatorily, that will make the business case for deploying rural broadband more attractive. And I appreciate the time and the opportunity, and we look forward to working with all of you on these things going forward. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Budzlowski.
Thank you and good morning, Madam Chairman, Chairman Santaciero, Leader Costa, other senators, and Home Senator Joe Pittman and representatives. My name is Frank Budzlowski, and for those of you in the audience other than Jeff Pyle wonder who Buzz is, it's short for Budzlowski. It's my nickname. I'm the Director of State Government Relations for Verizon in Pennsylvania. I represent and advocate for all the Verizon entities, so that includes our landline, our wireless, and our internet, to the Pennsylvania Senate and to the House and to every executive branch of the Commonwealth. The bad thing about going last is that almost everything I was going to say has already been said, but the good thing about going last is about everything I was going to say has been said, so I got to cross out an awful lot of my testimony. So I'm just going to reference some of these and then hopefully leave enough time for the senators and representatives to ask questions. It's been referenced before, but just to recap, and when I first started talking about broadband, and this is going back a long time, I've been in this job 25 years now, there weren't any smartphones, there weren't iPads, there were no tablets, there was no Twitter or Facebook. Comcast didn't have telephone service. Voice over internet like Skype and Vonage and Magic Jack weren't even heard of. And I don't think there was anybody around that would have imagined giving up their landline in favor of just using a cell phone. In other words, there was no competition to speak of. Verizon had about 99.9% of the customer base. You know, everybody had a landline. And as Steve Samara just referenced, and by the way, I hit 2 bars last night on my phone. There was something this legislature passed, which was called Chapter 30 of the Public Utility Code, which Commissioner Kennard is very much aware of. And it was passed in 1993. It was revised in 2004, and so the revision was on my watch. And at that time, we committed to 100% broadband coverage of the Commonwealth at a blazingly fast speed of 1.544 megabits per second. I still remember legislators and constituents saying, what are we going to do with that kind of speed? You know, the people were still, I mean, only the old timers like me are going to remember the screeching of the handshake when you dialed up to the internet. Your modem made that screeching sound. That was the handshake. It got you on the net. On dial-up, you're talking 56 kilobits. 1.544 megabits was just an astounding number. So we embarked on that, and we completed it in 2015. And we do have access to, or offer access, excuse me, to all of our landline customers. Well, then a lot of dramatic things happened over the last number of years. We went from 8.5 million landlines to about 2.7 million landlines. We went from 100% of the households having landlines to 5.3%, that's single digit, 5.3% of households being landline only. We went from 99.9% of the marketplace to 15% of the marketplace when you include all the other competitors, including VoIP and Magic Jack and Comcast and so forth. So what we found is the investment that we committed to and that we did complete resulted in a lot of stranded investment. And it's not a complaint, it's an observation because the investment still was there and still being used by customers. But after spending a few $1 billion on this, 6,000 miles of fiber optic cable connecting our central offices to remote terminals, and then as time evolved and we saw that wireless was going to be the ultimate solution to rural Pennsylvania, we deployed over 200 4G LTE cell towers. And that's just rural. That doesn't include the non-rural towers that we have deployed. And what has happened is that we've also discovered that even with the deployment of those cell towers, that you don't get 100% coverage. Now, when people talk about broadband, and we have to define, you know, so state law, 1.544 megs. FCC, it's been referenced, it's a lot faster. Coverage of broadband, utilization of broadband, using wireless. If it's a landline, if it's fiber optics or copper, okay, you have a steady signal, it always works. If it's wireless, spring comes, leaves bloom on the trees, all of a sudden your signal is interrupted. I can literally walk into my man cave in my house. I live in a far outreach of the city of Philadelphia, and there's a tower 3 blocks from my house. And I walk down there and I lose broadband. I cannot download anything. And I'm not below ground. It's just the topography. You lose the signal. So I use the landline signal. Now, lest you think that I'm a city slicker and don't know anything about rural, I married a girl from Nebraska. And I can tell you that when I go to visit her folks several times a year in western Nebraska, in North Platte, okay, they have wireless broadband, and they have a very high speed. But for the one tower that's put up in North Platte, it covers many, many, many miles. It covers our in-laws' ranch, it covers so on and so forth. It's a tremendous coverage. We put up a tower in Pennsylvania, you don't have to be, you know, just coming down the terrain. All you have to do is go around the turn to the next mountain. Driving a turnpike, Sidling Hill. Take a look sometime when you're west of Sidling Hill. We have 3 towers within 1 mile to cover that one section. Why? Because of the mountainous terrain. And that is really the challenge that we are finding. And what we are doing about it is we continue to invest in our towers. We continue to invest in something new technology called small cells. You may have heard about 5G. 5G is not in and of itself a rural solution, but 5G is the newest technology, and you're going to see more and more small cellular transmitters put out there to provide that service, but also provide 4G. And you would look at potential solutions, like not having a signal here. I wouldn't envision, my first time here, but driving through, I wouldn't envision tearing down a whole lot of trees and putting a tower up, but I could envision putting a small cell on top of a building and providing service to an area. So these are some of the things that we'd be looking at. But to conclude, I'd like to say that it's got to be a joint effort. It's got to be Verizon, it's got to be Steve Samara's local exchange carrier company members who cover the rest of the geography of Pennsylvania on the landline side. It's got to be AT&T and Sprint and T-Mobile and Comcast and the other cable companies. And hopefully with some government help, and we're not asking for money, from Verizon's perspective, not looking for subsidy, but as Steve Samara referenced, maybe get some of the roadblocks out of the way, maybe make it easier to deploy small cells. There's legislation pending in the House on that. And maybe look at tax credits or other things that would help to incent to deploy in areas to get the faster speeds that are needed. Thank you.
I have about 2 hours worth of questions for you all, myself. Excellent points on regulatory barriers, financial challenges, so many exceptional points, mapping and the need for accurate mapping. And the recent report out of the Center for Rural Pennsylvania indicated there's 11 million people across the state without access to high-speed internet. Recently, I sat down with a York-based company, United Fiber and Data. United Fiber and Data is running dark fiber, New York City, all the way down to outside of Washington, D.C. It's coming right through York County, and then they're in this process of running lines off of this. And they called me because for the first time in attaching fiber across a bridge, the Department of Environmental Protection now told them that they have to go through a permitting process. Never having done this before, they called and said, we've never had to do this before. I said, well, how do you move dirt? And he said, we don't move dirt. We're just attaching it to the bridge. And I'm going, well, if you're not moving anything, why do you need that permit? He said, that's why we called you. So, clearly there's some regulatory barriers. It seems that, as Senator Costa said, innovative technology, that the regulatory system doesn't always know how to respond to the new technologies. Even if there's not an environmental impact, we now have to get DEP permits. Can you talk about why that's happening? And if you can, I mean, Sherry, maybe you're the right person to ask, but can you talk about the administration's efforts to reduce regulatory barriers to accelerate the deployment of high-speed internet? Because certainly, when I talk to them, I look at this process, they're going to be able to connect a good pocket of people off of this, but it could take another year and a great amount of money, thus increasing the costs that the business is going to have to outlay and increasing what they're going to have to charge the consumers at the end of the line. So can you talk about how at the state level we're trying to reduce regulatory barriers?
Sure. So I'll address it to the extent that I can, with the understanding that I have not received a call from UFD, which is highly unusual because normally they're happy to call. But I did make a note to follow up with you on that and see what the situation is there. I think the pole attachments are one of the biggest issues that we've had in the last year. One of the things that has been brought to my attention, I've been very fortunate to have a great resource in Steve Samara and, of course, Commissioner Kennard, and bouncing ideas off of one another and talking about some of these challenges. And so I think what we're going to see is more communication with the Office of Broadband Initiatives, as well as with the legislative members and our providers, to talk about some of these legislative burdens. There are barriers, absolutely, but there is nothing definitive that we're doing at the moment to address those particular issues. Today is the first that I've heard about that one. But I think it is something that we need to take a serious look at to determine what are some of these barriers to entry are we experiencing, and how do we work together to identify those.
So, any thoughts on taking a comprehensive look at the regulatory structure that's impeding, everyone from Verizon to United Fiber and Data and every other company in between from further deploying these resources to allow access to these types of
Absolutely.
infrastructure?
I think that that's a good idea, and it's something that I'll go back and talk with the governor's office about as well, to see how they might seek to address that. As you know, at present time, I am the sole member of the Office of Broadband Initiatives. So as I travel around the state, we're collecting information and gathering information, just as this one, to set up discussions, future discussions with the governor's office about how we can take a look at some of these issues. Yeah,
Would
please.
appreciate that very much.
Senator, I just wanted to comment on that too, because I'm somewhat familiar with that. I think maybe the overarching issue is that the regulatory structure is set up in a world, in a time when this was utility. When you move to today's world, and if you were putting up a cell tower, it's a big deal. You go for zoning, and it's in and of itself. In today's world, if a new market entrant wants to put up fiber optics, welcome to our world. It's not just pole attachments, it's local permitting, it's undergrounding requirements. We're encountering that on the wireless side with putting up small cells. Simple thing that goes on top of a pre-existing electric or telephone pole, but we go through a zoning permitting process that really was meant for something else. That's my opinion, but that's what I think we're encountering.
Well, I can certainly say I appreciate the work that Commissioner Kennard and the PUC is doing on bringing that federal process down to the state level to make it quicker and easier for access here in the Commonwealth. But certainly, going forward, if there are regulatory barriers to further deploying these assets into communities, particularly rural communities, we would like to know, because I think on both sides of the aisle and on both sides of the General Assembly, there's great interest in removing those barriers from your work and the people we represent's access. So Senator Pittman has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner, thank you for your testimony. You talked about the primacy that you're taking from the FCC to permit polls, expedite that process, and you mentioned that the ALJs will be the arbitrators, to use Mr. Samara's words, the local cop. I worry a little bit about the expediency and the cost of that process. I mean, how confident are you that you have the infrastructure in place to move any disputes quickly and resolve them in a timely manner? Because obviously, the longer it takes, the more cost prohibitive it is to actually do it.
Completely agreed. So currently the situation is primacy is in Washington, D.C. The FCC is a prolific issuer of policy pronouncements, but a, pardon my language, lousy disposer of issues and complaints. So there is no real resolution at the FCC. You either take it or leave it, as Steve Sabera explained. We're going to bring those rules into Pennsylvania, and we have existing ALJs, and we have an expedited process. It fits into our current structure as a complaint filed against a pole operator, or a pole operator against an attacher if there's an illegal attachment. But beyond that, so you can have a formal hearing process. We also have mediation, and we're going to do this shortly, maybe tomorrow or the next public meeting. And one of the things we're talking about is having it's not a task force, it's a working group. So there's a dialogue on a continuing basis, monthly, bi-monthly, where all the operators get in a room and talk about their complaints, their issues, so we can try to prioritize this and get a handle on it. Part of my personal hope is that we may ding a couple at the beginning, a couple of attachers or pole operators, but then the message is going to get out that the commission's serious about this. We better start towing the line. We can't overrun the deadlines. We can't charge excessive fees for make-ready. I hope that's responsive.
I just worry about the length of time and delay to resolve a dispute.
The current rule is 180 days. We're exploring whether or not we need to have a procedure that overruns that. But 180 days is for a formal hearing process, and you understand that's not the only mechanism here. But if it defaults to that, if we go formal with lawyers and witnesses, the current standard is 180 days.
Well, the cost of doing anything doesn't go down over time. And to Steve's point about a business case to deliver service to rural communities, taking 6 months to resolve a dispute still seems to be a pretty lengthy time frame, and I would hope you would try to expedite that process to make that much more efficient. I don't see much value in us taking over primacy of this if we're not going to be prepared to do this
Right.
quickly.
Point well taken.
Otherwise, it's just another headache.
Just more bureaucracy.
Correct, correct. And just quickly to Director Collins, I appreciate your comments about our tax structure versus the state of Texas, but I do think you have to look at that in the broad overview of what the tax structures look like. For example, we have the highest corporate net income tax in the nation. Texas does not. I don't think they even have one. And so I worry very much when we talk about that. And also the impact tax, which we're the only state in the nation that has that. You know, if we don't produce this resource and produce it responsibly, nobody's paying the tax. And currently our drilling count is dropping in the Commonwealth. And so I think we need to take a look at that broad context as we're having the debate over Restore PA. Thank you.
Just to add to that, Bradford County, the county commissioners did in fact use impact fees to invest in broadband deployment through their Progress Authority. And so that option is available for those that do receive impact fees, that they can earmark some of that for a telecommunications broadband deployment.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Pittman. Chairman Santicero.
Thank you, Madam Chair. One of the issues that I think became clear to me as I was listening to all of your testimonies this morning is understanding really the scope of the problem geographically. Because as Buzz said, the topography of Pennsylvania is actually very different in different places. Where we live in the southeastern part of the state, you know, we're getting toward the coastal plain. We don't have as many hills and certainly no mountains. And so some of the barriers both to putting new lines down as well as cellular wireless coverage are not as extreme as they may be here or other parts of the state. Moreover, if we're thinking about different ways that the state might be helpful from fiscal policy beyond something like Restore that I do support, you know, the tax credit model, for example, which a number of other states have done, is my understanding, it would be helpful to have a real good sense of what the geographic story is here. So I think, Mr. Denk, you might have said earlier that there was not or maybe it was Commissioner Kennard, I don't recall, that there is not a comprehensive mapping in Pennsylvania of the lack of self. So that I would guess the providers would have some good sense of that, but maybe working together, we can get our arms around that, because I think that would be a critical place to start.
There's not a comprehensive, accurate mapping. Every methodology suffers from some level of data corruption or assumptions made. For example, the FCC model, if there's one customer served in a census block, the whole census block is attributed to have 100% broadband. Well, that's just clearly wrong, because as we know, this is all local. This is all, you know, in the hollow. This is all in the small area. You could we're 15 minutes from Indiana, and look how different the situation is. So it's all very granular and very local, but that was why, one of the things I was suggesting was, we need local input, because the local people know. We can do all the, high-level 50,000-foot mapping we want to, but it's the folks in this room that know if they have it or they don't have it, and that's why local grassroots participation is so important.
I agree, and again, I think that will largely inform what the right course of solution is, both from an infrastructure standpoint and from a fiscal policy standpoint. So to the extent that we can, in the state government, whether in the legislature or the executive branch, help make that happen, I think that's an important first step. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Representative Struzzi?
Thank you. Thank you all again for being here today. My question, and maybe in lieu of the question just asked that there may not be an answer, is, what is the price tag that we're looking at here to address all of these rural broadband areas? Is there a number?
The number that I heard when I stepped into this capacity was about $1 billion to fix the broadband issues. But again, I think that goes back to Commissioner Kennard's point about the mapping. It's very hard to put a price tag on something if you don't have a definitive idea of what you're dealing with. I think that it's probably safe to say that we're definitely north of $500 million, probably somewhere between 500 and $1 billion. But again, a lot of that is going to be contingent upon what is discovered as we start to roll this out. I think one of the things is that we are taking a technology neutral standpoint as well, in the sense of the topography in Pennsylvania. To say that we are going to do one form of infrastructure versus another, I think is irresponsible. I think that we need to really be capable of pivoting and looking at what technologies could be utilized in different areas of the states. Is it fiber to the home? Is it satellite? The challenge with satellite, as we all know, is that it's unpredictable and it's based on weather conditions. Probably about 2 months ago, I was in Sullivan County, driving down the road through Eaglesmere, and all of a sudden, I look to my left and I see probably about 30 mature trees, literally cut down to about 10 feet in height. And I thought, well, that's kind of weird. So I turned and looked, and here there was a gentleman on his roof fixing his satellite dish. And I understand that in sharing that experience with other people, that is not unusual for a lot of places that have satellite. So we need to be flexible in the approach. We need to look at what technologies are available, what will work in certain areas, what's going to hit those areas in the holler, so to speak, that the sun doesn't shine on, and so on and so forth. So I think that's one of our biggest challenges, is trying to identify an exact amount of money that is needed to fix this.
Good. You kind of answered my next question. As we try to be conscientious stewards of the taxpayer dollars and we start talking about new taxes, we need to make smart investments. So I am excited to hear, I'll call you Buzz because I don't want to mispronounce your last name, but I mean, the idea that we can have, smaller cells that, would address these rural areas, I think is smart innovation. And I think that I agree with you that that's the direction we need to go in. I don't want to see us spend $1 billion to hardwire all of Pennsylvania with fiber optics only to find that obsolete. So, all right, thank you.
Madam Chairman, may I, Representative Struzzi, and I hope I pronounced your name properly. Okay, and Buzz is fine. It's billions, plural, could be tens of billions. It depends on your speed. If you're looking at 100 megabits, which in some proposals, then you need fiber to the home, fiber to the farmhouse. As Steve Samara will tell you for his companies and mine, that is the most expensive thing there is, because you're always rolling your truck to, first of all, put up the poles or attach to the poles. Now you're going from the pole to the location. And then there's no guarantee that after all that fiber is strung aerially, because you're not going underground in rural areas in most places. After that's all done, then you have stranded investment if the next technology comes along and supersedes it. Satellite, there's pros and cons. A lot of people love their satellite, and there's people that they cut down 30 trees to get it, and it works fine, and there's other people that, you know, they don't like the service, you know, for whatever reason, you know, or different story, okay? But leaving that out of the equation, if you're at 100 megs, you're talking an awful lot, unbelievable amount of money. Come down to 25 megs, now you're looking at towers, but what do you do for that one residence that is in the dip, that doesn't get the signal? Well, now putting a small cell in for that one residence and start multiplying that out by tens of thousands and so forth. So it's a long way of saying that we really don't have a number, but it's plural, it's billions of dollars to get. And again, depending on what your speed is. If you want at 1.544 megs, then we're pretty much there, but you know, people want and need a lot more than that.
Plus, we can't forget that even 5G and some of these other technologies are still riding on fiber backbone.
Yeah, that's right.
We're not at the point now where it's just strictly wireless. I mean, a cell phone call goes from tower through my guys' network, through Buzzy's legacy network to the next tower. 5G would operate the same way. So technology is going to cure a lot of these problems, as a bunch of you folks have already said. We're not there today, but that legacy traditional network, whether it's copper or fiber, still is going to carry a lot of this traffic.
Thank you, and I will say this, Director Collins, you know, certainly this committee, and I think the General Assembly as a whole is very interested in working with all the stakeholders and the administration to really quantify the size and scope and magnitude of this problem, and to be technology neutral, recognizing that there's probably a kid running around somewhere, maybe in Indiana County, maybe back home in York County, who's going to create the perfect solution, and maybe someday we'll find it. But until then, we don't want to preclude that perfect solution going forward. But, you know, trying to quantify the cost of what is going to need to be done. And I guess if I can circle back to Senator Pittman's comments with regard to a proposed severance tax. I arrived in the General Assembly, was sworn in 2015. A severance tax was proposed to fund property tax elimination, and then a severance tax was proposed to fund public education, both highly desirable goals as well. You know, I guess my sense is that the General Assembly really hasn't had an appetite to impose a new tax, a severance tax. So has the administration worked to identify potential, other potential revenue sources in the event that, once again, the General Assembly would not have an appetite for a severance tax?
So that's a great question. I can't speak entirely about what the administration has or has not proposed. What I will tell you is that the severance tax has been proposed because as we sit on one of the largest shale deposits in the country, we have an opportunity to take advantage of the resources that we have to be able to generate the capital that we need. And so I think the governor has openly stated to members of the General Assembly that if you have other proposals that you believe would generate this type of capital, that he is more than willing to entertain those discussions. And I think that there have been some things that have been proposed, but again, you go back to the impact fee. And to Barry's point earlier, yes, the impact fee could possibly be used for broadband infrastructure in these communities. But when the impact fee is so small relative to what a severance tax could bring in, I think you look at the severance tax as being the most likely opportunity to try to generate that amount of capital. Now, the reality is that we would not pay the severance tax in Pennsylvania. That tax would be passed on to people in other states who are utilizing that post-production asset. And I think that's the important thing here. And that comes from the Independent Fiscal Office. This isn't something that the administration has identified. This is information that's come from the Independent Fiscal Office, and it seems to me like there is good, strong information there that we should be able to look at the severance tax as an opportunity. Again, I recognize that there are some sensitivities to that, but until another solution is brought to bear, the Wolf administration is going to stay steadfast on Restore Pennsylvania. And again, what that allows us to do is not just fix our broadband infrastructure issues, but fix our 4-digit rural roads that need to be paved. It also helps communities with flood mitigation and planning. 2018 was the wettest season on record. We had a lot of people that were displaced in Pennsylvania as a result of that flooding. The federal agencies are not providing the level of support that we need to address those issues. Restore Pennsylvania is another plan in which we could utilize to address these infrastructure issues. So I wanted to state that for this morning's testimony, because I think that we have a great opportunity with the Marcellus Shale under our feet to take advantage of that, to make sure that the people of Pennsylvania are being served in a way that they need to be served. So I appreciate your thoughts on that.
With all due respect, there's certainly another side to that conversation. And we're here today to talk about how we're going to close the digital divide. And legislating is always the art of the possible. That magic equation of Harrisburg, 102 plus 26 plus 1. And we will need to work there. But certainly, I'm not certain that the third time will be the charm. But I certainly hope, and I'm heartened to hear that the administration would consider other revenue sources so that we can truly address this issue. Representative Dush.
Thank you, Senator. I think we're long past the question of whether there's a need. That's the main thing that I think we can all agree on. And when we talk about, and I believe it's actually going to be more than $1 billion, but when it's all said and done, but it doesn't necessarily all have to come from the public coffers either. Especially when we've got such an abominable record here in Pennsylvania. $800 million wasted for the Pennsylvania State Police on infrastructure for radios that did not work out. $400 million plus for an upgrade to a computer software program for the Department of Labor and Industry. The things that we have to do, and I'm going to go back to my military background, you take a look at what the needs are, first of all, what the mission is. First, we have a mission to try and get the broadband out to the people who are not served here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Next, you identify what the obstacles are, and that's the thing that we're at the point right now that we have to start looking at the obstacles and what our resources are. The mapping is something that is exceedingly important. The commissioner touched on the FCC's requirement, and that thing is just ridiculous. Penn State's got, and unfortunately I don't have internet here, so I can't pull up the resources that Congressman Thompson brought up here last week with the Farm Bureau. But they have resources where they can actually measure the internet speeds for each and every person that has internet accessibility. We should be utilizing that resource. The thing that we need to do is start looking at what our obstacles are, what the best management principles are, and the people who are going outside the box. You're going to hear from Ed Matz here later today. We got $300 million of a $600 million, or $300,000 out of a $600,000 project to help fund 7 projects that they've got going, because they've already been successful, as it was mentioned up in Bradford County and other areas, at getting broadband to people, and it's been on the cheap. And that is one of the things that you're going to hear, and it's those types of people that I would like to see us focusing on, and those types of solutions, and focusing on how we get it done. I'm hoping that your office, Secretary or Director, will be able to pull those resources together and get people focused on that. My question to you is, what resources are you pulling together in order to get to that? And what have you already seen as some of the outside of the box solutions? And I'm grateful also to the remarks about the polls and other, those are the obstacle things that we need. But what have you seen as some of the solutions? And I'll take it from anybody else.
Sure, thank you, Representative. So just by way of background, I have the fortunate pleasure of serving as Governor Wolf's state alternate to the Appalachian Regional Commission. The Appalachian Regional Commission is a quasi-federal state program that runs out of Washington, D.C. Very well aware of Mr. Matz. We would like to 3D print him, but we don't have enough money for a 3D printer, so that's out of the box thinking, but probably not likely. Right. Ed has been doing yeoman's work, right? Trying to make sure that people in rural Pennsylvania do in fact have coverage, that our businesses are connected the way that they need to be. And so what we're doing in our office, because I wear those two hats and I'm still very connected to the Department of Community and Economic Development that funds our local development districts, Ed's organization, North Central Regional Development and Planning Commission, we provide funding to them. So of course we're always working with our local development districts in an effort to try to identify sources of capital. In this particular case, that was a legislative support that came in, and we are very, very thankful for that. We think that this will prove to be a good test model. But if you look at the $300,000 for the Northwest Commission and what the folks are doing with Jim Chorney and Ed Matz, and what CEDACOG is doing, that's $600,000 right there. And that is still an expensive proposition. These are pilot programs. We are looking at identifying ways to address some of these issues and to get some of these short-term wins. I also am very fortunate again because in the last 8 months I've been able to develop relationships with the folks to my left and of course the Broadband Cable Association that's represented here today by Brian Barno. And so sometimes what we're doing, Representative, are merely connecting with one another and saying, look, you have a pocket of individuals in this particular district that need some level of support. Maybe they need increased speeds. Maybe they're in a community that's akin to what we're in here today, very wooded area, topography playing a crucial role in what they're able to get. Sometimes those providers don't even know that these people are having issues until they're brought to our attention. And so when a constituent contacts me and says, listen, you know, I want to go back to school, but I can't go back to school because I don't have the connectivity that I need to do my online program, one of the first things that we're going to ask is, who is your local provider? And then based on that, we go back to the association predominantly. In some cases, we'll go right to the company, but we find that working with association presidents and CEOs has been very helpful for us. So they're little wins, right? They're wins nonetheless, and it's getting people connected, and that's what we're about. We're also working with the USDA. We want to look very closely at the USDA's Reconnect program and identify ways that Pennsylvania's applicants can be winners in that process. But to Steve's point, USDA funds are shared all across the country, not just in Pennsylvania. ARC funds are shared across 13 Appalachian Regional Commission states, Pennsylvania being one of those 13. So again, there's always that level of competition where we're competing with others for funding, which is why we go back to Restore. Because if we have Restore, then we can fund our own programs in our own state. And that's really what we're focused on doing. So we're focusing on little opportunities, little wins, as I mentioned, but we're also looking at it from a much bigger, broader perspective. Again, we'd love to replicate Ed Matz in various areas across the Commonwealth. We introduce Ed to other people. We look for other types of technologies that are brought to bear. I think when you and I had our conversation a few months ago and we shared the military connection with yourself and of course my husband and son, one of the things that we talked about was the military can go into the deepest, thickest canopy of a jungle and have comms. They can go into barren land and have communications almost instantaneously. You would think that we could do something like that in Pennsylvania. And so we're looking at how can we partner with perhaps military spin-offs that have been designed to support some of these communications efforts. We have a company in Pennsylvania called Ragent Corporation. It's down in the southeast part of the state. Ragent has been actively involved in Kentucky's broadband infrastructure issues. Well, the founder of that company, the CEO of that company, happened to sit on my board at the Ben Franklin Tech Development Authority. So of course those conversations are happening as well. And I think that's what we need to do, is we need to continue to keep the lines of communication open with providers, with other type of technology companies, and certainly with the General Assembly, our borough council, our mayors, our county commissioners, because at the end of the day, this all has to happen at a local level. We need to address what is occurring on the ground in your communities.
What are we doing for the inventory of the assets that we do have available? I know Ed's got everybody in North Central looking and telling them whenever there's a tower or a pole or something. What are we doing to get an inventory done on that?
There are various activities that are occurring. Certainly there's, I believe, legislation pending. And it is my understanding that the Department of General Services has identified Agile as a recipient of funds that will help manage and identify the state assets. I think that just came out in mid-July. I myself don't have any further information on that, but certainly something that we can get from the Department of General Services as well.
Thank you, Representative Dush. Panelists, thank you very much. Really appreciate you being here today.
Thank you.
So we're now going to move into our local government panel. We're very fortunate. We are very fortunate today to have joining us for our discussion Mr. Christopher Ghazi, and I will apologize if I mispronounced your name, Assistant Director for the Local Government Commission, Mr. Joe Gertis, Director of Government Relations for the Pennsylvania Association of Township Supervisors, and Mr. Rodney Ruddick, Indiana County Commissioner. And thank you, gentlemen, for being here. And I again would ask, if at all possible, please summarize your opening remarks. I think the panel would, there are probably many questions to be answered. So thank you for being here. And we'll start with Mr. Ghazi.
Good morning. My name is Chris Ghazi, and I serve the Local Government Commission as Assistant Director. We've been asked this morning to participate in this hearing to share the local government perspectives related to the extension of rural broadband. The Commission consists of members of all four caucuses of the legislature, composed of members of the majority and minority parties of each of those caucuses, and as a practice consistent with our overall goal to advance the effectiveness and efficiency of local government in Pennsylvania, the Commission makes its professional staff available to other projects that are going on throughout the legislature to provide research and on just about any issue where possible. But therefore, our comments today do not amount to an endorsement of the policies proposed here, discussed here by the Commission as a whole. But we are just trying to put some local government context into some of these issues. In my prepared remarks, I spent some time discussing the provision of services throughout our local governments in the Commonwealth, and to share that there's really a variety of models in the way that that can happen. We rely on some models to say we're going to use taxpayer resources directly to provide a service for everyone. We're going to use some other models where we rely on fee-for-services, and you get what you pay for, just like in the context of a private business. And in some other models, those two funding mechanisms are really blended together, where part of the investment is made by the taxpayers as a whole, and part of our services are funded on a fee-for-service basis. And I raise that because at this point, we have not had a large amount of local government participation in the space for broadband extension. And this may be a point where it's worth asking the question, should our local community leaders be more directly involved in bringing the extension of broadband into their communities. There are some other states that have used some different models. Some of those could be a pattern in Pennsylvania if that's something that this body is interested in pursuing. But essentially what the goal there is to look at local leaders and say, you are the people who know your most direct responding constituents the best. You work with these people. These people are the ones who put their faith and trust in you in the same way that all of you experience with your constituents as well. And the two ways that could be a possibility, and in addition to general funding mechanisms like tax rebates and things like that that could be in partnership with other grant programs from the Commonwealth, could be to either leverage intergovernmental cooperation, where we look at a variety of communities putting their resources together, forming either formal entities, sometimes referred to as councils of governments, to team up and say, this region wants to make an investment in some of our broadband infrastructure to encourage either more private investment or a public-private partnership. And then the other is to utilize the tool that is local debt through the Local Government Unit Debt Act. Local debt, of course, is something that has to be taken on with some thought and consideration to make sure that investments are wise. But we use Laguda for our bridge projects and our road projects, and to build our municipal buildings, and to make sure we have the salt truck to take care of the roads in winter and things like that. And in cases where maybe the biggest, hardest question to get to an isolated community is finding some money for that infrastructure to bring dark fiber so that you can encourage private investment on the last mile and things like that. Maybe that's a tool that could be used to team up a public investment on part of it with a private investment component. It's actually something that our neighbors to the south in Maryland have dabbled around with a little bit. There was a pilot program in Westminster, Maryland, where Westminster wanted to bring in high-quality fiber-based broadband. Now, Westminster is a medium-sized community. It's not totally isolated, but they did want to bring in a alternative. And the way that they did it was they brought in one private contractor to install, to do their fiber install, and then they said, this is now our asset, and we're going to bring in another private contractor to be our internet service provider and essentially rent that asset from Westminster to provide that service. I know in many cases, internet service providers would prefer to use their own infrastructure, and it's certainly not something that would be a panacea or relevant in all applicable uses, but it could be a tool. In similar fashion, the state of New Hampshire has utilized local debt to try to create partnerships and bring broadband where it isn't. That program's been in place for about a year, and there's at least a couple of cases where there have been local debt issuances to kickstart projects that weren't happening on their own. So I mention all of those to say not that the Local Government Commission thinks that X or Y is a perfect solution or not, but we're happy to be a resource. It could be a space where local government could be a part of the conversation going forward, and we're happy to help with any research along the way. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Mr. Gertis.
Madam Chairman, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, representatives, our host, Senator Pittman. Good morning. My name is Joe Gertis. I'm the Director of Government Relations for the Pennsylvania State Association of Township Supervisors. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to speak today on behalf of the 1,454 townships in Pennsylvania that are represented by this association on this critical issue. Our member townships represent 5.6 million Pennsylvanians, and we cover 95% of the landmass of Pennsylvania. So we're touching a lot of these areas that we're talking about here today. I'm going to try and cut through my written remarks here for timing. I apologize if I'm a little jumping around here. I want to hit, I'm probably going to highlight some of the things that have already been said, and I apologize for that. But first and foremost, I wanted to mention that this lack of broadband access is a public safety issue. The inability to harness real-time information and technologies to address situations and threats to the public should be a primary concern. And I wanted to note the important work that's being done with the FirstNet initiative, and it's making great strides to ensure that communication for first responders, and I wanted to applaud that work and ask for your help to get that to completion. There's other areas such as traffic information, real-time road updates, which also have a public safety component to them as well. Not to mention this broadband infrastructure is going to play a crucial role in the development of autonomous vehicles, which we know are coming, and to hopefully safely transport people and freight throughout our communities. This lack of access also has has been discussed, some really real implications on commerce and the quality of life. Much of Pennsylvania will be hobbled in its ability to attract new business or retain existing businesses. Small business owners and farmers will be uncompetitive, missing out on efficiencies and technology that may be made available to them. Students will not be able to access educational opportunities, complete homework, or the newly popular attend classes on a snowy day, putting them to a distinct disadvantage to their peers. The inability of healthcare facilities to share important life-saving data or use modern medical advancements in patient diagnosis and treatments will put some people at risk, especially in areas that are already medically underserved. Local governments themselves are also hindered by this lack of service, as the federal and state governments require more, if not all, documents to be submitted electronically. Local governments, like townships, sometimes have to go to great lengths to access vital services and revenues. And from a constituent's perspective, they want to be able to pay their bills online. They want the transparency of watching meetings like this online. And they want to monitor local road and bridge projects. We're encouraged by this committee's attention and resolve to bring this issue before your colleagues, and for the governor's commitment to this effort with the creation of the Office of Broadband Initiatives, setting a target date of 2022 to provide all Pennsylvanians with broadband coverage. Madam Chairman, your Senate Bill 470 to complete an inventory of state assets available to assist in the deployment is so important as we assess the feasibility for providing this service, the barriers, the gaps in areas where we need to improve. Given the geography, it's been noticed in the topography of our state, it's likely we're going to need a combination of fiber, wire, wireless, and satellite to get the job done. Knowing what assets public and private entities bring to the table will help not only in the speed of deployment, but the costly duplication as well. The townships understand their important role in this deployment with their physical assets, local expertise, and services. To that end, we'd like to echo some of the projects that we like seeing that have been referenced already. Efforts like Central Bradford Progress Authority using Act 13 and grant money to fund an $11 million three-phase fiber installation. CEDACOG's pilot initiative to partner with service providers to open access to their 11 member county communication towers. And as they did with electricity not even 100 years ago, some of Pennsylvania's rural electric cooperatives are stepping up to provide broadband service to their customers. These projects and partnerships will be very important to close this digital divide. All levels of government, local, state, and federal, must work together with the private sector to help close it. This task it may be too big if we don't. And we simply can't let some of our Pennsylvanians left behind. The State Association of Township Supervisors will continue to work with you all to accomplish the goal of safe and efficient deployment of high-speed internet access to our constituents. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gertis. Commissioner Ruddick, thank you for being here.
I've been waiting 16 years for this opportunity.
Well, we're very glad that you're here.
Thank you very much. I just want to say to the legislative team that's assembled today, thank you for what you do. this is a challenge that we're facing today, and there's many other challenges out there that we face, whether we're legislatively or even as county commissioners. And I believe it was Executive Director Collins said it very well. At the end of the day, we have to look to the support of our local leaders. That's us. We are the local leaders. Shireen Hess is here joining with me today. I have 8 pages of bona fide testimony that I was up till 2 o'clock this morning completing as I was coming back from Reading from a meeting with the County Commissioners Association. I'm going to narrow it down to the key points. The first thing is, in 2010, they had a national broadband agenda that we were to follow. And if you look at it, it deals with all the issues that we should be looking at with broadband. Energy, obviously agriculture, business, industry, education. We are woefully short of that agenda. We have not addressed the issues that we need to address because we totally don't understand the frustrations that others are feeling. And I can't think of a better place to hold this event today here at this beautiful park of Indiana County. And I'm proud of it. We are proud, and we have Indiana residents who are here today who are proud. They live in this area of Rain Township. We have a township supervisor in Rain Township. 2 of them are here today. They're here because they don't have any signal. I wish, is Tony Ruseski here today? Tony has sent me dozens of mails and emails, not from where I'm sure she has them at home because they don't have service at home, to say, Commissioner, we need your help. I'm a teacher. I cannot get my students to have any kind of connectivity at home in our area. It has a blemish on their ability to be competitive when they go off to school. Now here we are, sitting here in this beautiful facility, 5 miles from our county seat, 5 miles from our county seat of Indiana County, Christmas tree capital of the world. 5 miles from the 2nd largest state-owned institution of Pennsylvania. 5 miles. We have no signal. In fact, as I was driving here today, I went to test it, to just get a read on where we are with broadband here in this park. And here's what it reads. I'm going to go back to it. Safari cannot open the page because your iPhone is not connected to the internet. Something wrong with that picture. We have to fix it. We don't have now any economic multipliers to aid us in building an economic base in Indiana County. Our agricultural community is suffering because they cannot maintain the pace of business that's required in today's economy to make a dollar. And we have agricultural teams here today because of that. We have not addressed how we're going to fit and complete. And now, keep in mind, 16 years ago, I couldn't have used any of this jargon, but I'm going to use it today. Last mile. It's the last connectivity that we have to get operational. We cannot complete the last mile because the lack of leadership and the lack of funding. That's the issue. I applaud the fact that we have this event today. I applaud the fact that we have an executive director at the state who has taken ownership, but if I heard her correctly, she's a standalone leader. Think about that. How are you ever going to be able to massively take an ownership of completing all the requirements that we have as leaders in our community to oversee this project? And frankly, that's the challenge we have. We have to have dedicated leadership with a team of experts who were here at the first panel to find out how can we make little things happen. We have vendors sitting back here who will call our office because they want to extend broadband into our community, but they can't get on a pole, or they can't move a wire, Or if they move a wire, they have to pay for the wires that were already on the pole that were screwed up by the prior users of the pole. Did I get that right? How can that be? I mean, I think there's a problem there. And I want to make sure that you understand that county commissioners are trying to do our very best. We have actually gone back. I want to go back to a couple of things here because Jim Wagner reminded me of Jim Wagner is the director of the Armstrong Intermediate Unit. And 16 years ago, the Intermediate Unit put in a program that would provide communication broadband into the 8 district schools. And they then would be required to carry that signal connectivity into the communities in which those school districts are based. That's rural America. They were supposed to do that. They didn't. They did not do that because the lack of funding, apparently, because vendor extension is a profit. If you don't make a profit, you don't do it. Now, Jim Wagner and his team and superintendents have undergone another event. What they're going to do is they've called upon another company to come in and do much the same as what the company did 10 years ago. The problem is the company said they're not going to have the ability to extend the last mile into the communities. So we are right back where we were 10 years ago unless someone comes up with a concept plan to say, look, if you invest in our schools, then we are going to ask that you invest in our communities. You have to carry that burden of responsibility out to be part of the solution. You cannot allow us to try to find vendors to come in to slap $50,000 together or $100,000 together when you have a multi-million-dollar project that needs to be done. We could invest all of our money in the Marcella's impact fee in broadband, and we have. It's not enough. We have to rally the team. You are the team. We are the team. Let's get it done. I mean, I'm gonna shorten my remarks. You can see I'm really passionate about this because we have something we need to get fixed in Pennsylvania. I think we can do it because I see the right people to get it done. But here's another issue that sort of bothers me. We didn't have signals, so we had a mandate in 2012, a federal FCC mandate called narrow banding, which required us to go out and put in new systems of radio communication throughout Indiana County to make sure our safety, our security, and our first responders were served well. And we did that. It cost us $18 million. We paid for that out of the general fund. There was no grant money, there was no support. We did it because we had a great EMA director and we had great service and we got it done. At the end of that project, we said, why can't we, because we had to add 4 tower sites to the 8 we had, so now we have 12 tower sites, why can't we then take some of that money we have earmarked for radio project and slide it over here and put in optic fiber? That's our commitment. We did. We took $2.5 million of that and strung optic fiber north and south in Indiana County and east and west. But we can't get vendors. We hired a contractor, but he is up to his neck because he doesn't have the capability financially to carry the signals into the homes of the people in the community they serve. That's something that I don't think I think we're failing to recognize that critical component. The other thing that's bothersome to me is that when we talk about broadband, there's an assumption that's also cellular service. You talk about digital divide. There's a digital divide in cellular service, there's a digital divide in broadband, and they're not the same. They all have to be supported differently. The public doesn't know that. When you say broadband, they say, well, I can't call my friend from home. That's because it's cellular. Now, okay. About a month and a half ago, in this park, and they carried this, and the media covered it pretty well in my meeting, because I got a little emotional with that too. At the park, we had 150 students there for an environmental-thon, all day, 8 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. At about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I said, I want to stay for the final event, and I want to be able to pass out the recognition of the awards. So I get on my phone to call my office, 5 miles away. No signal. No connectivity. And I'm thinking, 150 students here at 8 o'clock in the morning, let's suppose someone has a medical condition, an injury. How do we call an ambulance? We don't. So anytime you're in a county park, in most cases because of cellular lack of connectivity, people are at risk. And so we have to figure out next year when we have an environmental thon, how are we going to protect, because we have a responsibility to do that, those 150 students and the people who are there to support them. That has to be done. So that's on the plate. I'm going to close this up here. I'm sorry. I wrote something down here that I think sort of summarizes what I said earlier, and that'll be it with one more comment. The plan today to use another vendor does not include any connectivity or expansion in the communities serving our school districts. I believe this system that we use falls short of our expectation unless we can engage the vendor to carry this effort to a last mile status. We're good at middle mile, but we're not good at last mile. This has been talked about on many occasions, and frankly, I'm not sure anyone is listening to any of these recommendations. This is a feel-good moment for all of us. We need an action plan that follows a leadership plan to make this thing work. This truly remains our biggest challenge. I suggest that we only engage vendors who are willing to obligate a defined percentage of residential relief as part of their for-profit community contract. Somehow, there's got to be a way that we can enforce something. Now, that might be a little bit strong, and I understand that, but I still think we have to do something to change the mechanics of how we're lacking the funding support and the drive to finalize the last mile. You know, if you go back and look at history, that this is exactly the project I'm talking about that really spawned electricity driven from our urban into our rural sectors many, many years ago. It's exactly the same concept plan. And I'm just gonna say, Senators, on behalf of the citizens of Indiana County, representatives, we look to you for our support and help. We look for your support and help. We need to maintain focus. We need to maintain momentum because it's so easy to slip. And we need to have a direction on a full-time scale with leadership to create a better working and living community in Pennsylvania. We need an action plan, and we need it now. And thank you for all that you do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Commissioner, I can tell you that when I began working on this issue, I was told I was on a fool's errand. So I was not deterred, and I can tell neither were you. So if you could, you mentioned in your written testimony that some counties are leveraging existing assets in order to deploy broadband. Representative Pam Snyder, my good friend and former colleague in the House, and I crafted legislation. Thank you to Mr. Gertis for referencing it. We both have that now on the House and Senate side that would require the state through the Department of General Services to leverage existing state-owned assets for the further deployment of broadband. So I'm hoping that you could just briefly explain a little bit about how that's being done here at the county level. so that, we can learn from your success.
Thank you, Senator. I can tell you, we have a gentleman who is here today, Chad Carrick from our Rural Electric Cooperative. I believe essentially that counties need to connect with those particular programs across the state of Pennsylvania because they already have the poles in place, they have the management concept in place, they have the focus of what they want to do in place, and that would be an asset that I would like to help us drive our program. I actually, Chad was on our committee when we first started out the program, and he was frustrated because of the lack of response. And I think he today would like to reinvest, when I say he, his organization would like to reinvest in a management plan that is part of our relief to build this project forward. I was speaking to a good friend, County Commissioner Eric Coolidge from Tioga County. And apparently on the northern sector, they're doing some of those same things there that we're looking at down here. And unless we find a way to really partner with individuals who are willing to take it to the next level, I don't know if we're going to get it done, frankly. When we were talking today, and I hate to even say this, I wasn't going to say it, but I'm going to say it now. When I was talking about the cellular service in Indiana County, the cellular service here at the park, and how frustrated I was about those 150 kids, we have a tower site 150 yards up the hill. A tower site 150 yards up the hill. Now, they will tell me, and I'm sure, because we've tried to bring in a vendor to put something on that tower to give us signal in Ring Township, they will tell me, well, it's not engineered properly to do that. Well, okay, I will accept that, but why don't you come in and meet with us and tell us you can't do that? Why don't you come in and explore whether you can do something else instead of that? Maybe we would be willing to provide a county match for us to go on that tower site to take that signal out into the area. We're not afraid of doing that. But I think we need to get the utilities and the telecommunication support teams engaged to be working with us and not just sitting in panels to talk about what they're doing. We need to have them at our desk so we can work with them and get the job done. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you, Commissioner. Senator Pittman.
Thank you. Commissioner, I guess my biggest disappointment with your testimony was the realization that your term in office will be concluding here in a few months. And I just want to thank you for the service you've given to us, not only as a county commissioner, but a high school principal, and your service to our nation. And while this term will end for you in a few months, I'm quite confident your public service is going to continue down the road in bigger and better capacities. So thank you for your service.
Thank you very much, Senator. I appreciate your comments. Thank you very much.
I did want to talk about, and you raised the specter of a willingness to develop local match.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't have a full appreciation until you just spoke about the proximity of a cell tower, and I would hope that we can maybe sit down and do exactly what you recommended. A couple questions. You mentioned the use of your impact tax dollars for 911 services. And you also have, prior to Senator White leaving office, he secured a $500,000 grant to further initiate broadband infrastructure. Are you continuing to prioritize broadband infrastructure with those impact tax dollars you receive?
Yes, for the last 3 impact fees, we have put money into broadband for the purposes that I've just described. The challenge is our monies are going down, obviously, so there's not as much money to invest. But the monies that Senator White had brought in, I think it was $500,000. I think you and I have spoken about that. I think Byron Stauffer and I have spoken about that as well. What I think we should do, and I'm going to just focus back on broadband. Let's find a school district in Indiana County that's suffering, that really is unserved. And let's see if we could maybe use them as a model, that we could bring them up to where we think we want them to be, so we can then take that expectation and then take it to the other school districts in Indiana County, or any other county, Armstrong County. It doesn't make any difference, but we need to demonstrate we can do this. We just need to have a model by which it gets done.
I had one in mind.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here today. Your testimony was greatly appreciated.
Thank you very much for putting up with me.
Well, yeah, probably.
We're going to work on making these more efficient. We're doing good. All right. Mr. Matz? If I could, we'd like to begin our final panel. And our final panel of the day is going to focus on job creation and workforce development. And joining us on this panel are Dave Taylor, President and CEO of the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association, Edward Matz, Director of Information Systems for the North Central Pennsylvania Regional Planning and Development Commission, and Chad Carrick, President and CEO of the REA Energy Cooperative. So, gentlemen, thank you so much. Mr. Taylor, if you would start us off, we'd appreciate it.
Wonderful. Well, Madam Chairman, thank you so much for inviting me to testify. Thank you, Senator Santicero, members of the committee. Senator Pittman, thank you for being our host, and a special thanks to the distinguished Democratic leader, Senator Costa, for being here with us today. I'm David Taylor. I am with the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. We are the statewide not-for-profit organization that represents the people who make things in Pennsylvania. Manufacturing is the engine that drives Pennsylvania's economy, adding about $87 billion worth of value added every year, directly supporting about 565,000 Pennsylvania jobs on the plant floor. But manufacturing has the strongest spin-off effect on employment, and so that manufacturing activity on the plant floor sustains millions of additional jobs in supply chains and distribution networks and vendors of industrial services. So my message today, there are two concepts that I want to introduce to you, and this is all very new to me. And again, I'm an advocate of manufacturing, not an actual manufacturer. So my job is being a translator, and I'm just trying to get a grip on these advanced concepts. And the two concepts are a fourth industrial revolution and the Internet of Things. So PMA's mission is competitiveness. We want it to be the smart business decision for people to choose to invest and hire and locate and expand here in Pennsylvania rather than in one of our competitor states or overseas. And so I experienced competitiveness most vividly during the annual meeting of my peers, which is the Conference of State Manufacturing Associations, and it was just recently held for 2019. It moves around the country depending on who hosts. I hosted it in Hershey in 2017. The year before that, it was in Biloxi, Mississippi. Last year, it was in Salt Lake City. This year, it was in Saratoga Springs, New York. And again, it was mentioned before about Pennsylvania's energy sector and what that means for rural Pennsylvania. To cross the state line into the southern tier of New York State, where they have the same resource that our neighbors and friends in Bradford and Tioga and Susquehanna County are harnessing to help drive economic growth and prosperity, in their part of Pennsylvania, that the folks across the state line are deprived of all of that, and that the southern tier of New York is just withering on the vine. It just reminds us of the importance of our stewardship of Pennsylvania's energy opportunity and what that means for small-town Pennsylvania. And also, I just need to comment briefly about the administration and their insistence on a new industry-specific tax on Pennsylvania energy, comparing us to Texas. We agree that Pennsylvania should be much more like Texas. Texas has no impact fee, no corporate net income tax, no personal income tax. Texas is a right-to-work state. Texas has enacted very meaningful limits on lawsuit abuse. And if the administration is interested in trading those reforms for a severance tax, we think that's a discussion worth having. So anyway, being freshly back from my conference, one of the presenters was a man named Michael Rowe, who is with IBM's Watson artificial intelligence program. And most of what I'm going to share here is culled from his briefing. The world of manufacturing is entering a fourth industrial revolution, and for me, Pennsylvania has to act now to successfully compete in this new era. So let's mark it down. The first industrial revolution began in the late 1870s with the first mechanical loom. It was the first machine for mass production. So you moved from handmade to machine-made. The second industrial revolution was in 1870, where those machines were electrified, put on an assembly line, and you had division of labor and the efficiencies that came from that next quantum level. The third industrial revolution was in the late 1960s with the first programmable logic circuit, which was the dawn of the computer era and the birth of automation. Well, today, a new era is beginning, and that is one of continuous data-driven innovation. This is the birth of machine learning, which is to say that starting now, having a manufacturing facility without robust, consistent internet connectivity is as unimaginable as having it without electricity. So everything in the physical world is providing data to somewhere. For some time now, lots of data has been produced, but very little was being analyzed. A man named Kevin Ashton coined the term Internet of Things in 1999, and he developed the name while working on a PowerPoint presentation at Procter & Gamble. His MIT research and collaboration led to what we now call the Internet of Things, IoT. IBM Watson IoT interviewed Kevin earlier this year. A quote from him: "The real world contains countless trillions of terabytes of information, and 20th century computing could capture none of it. Computers needed to gather their own information by sensing the world for themselves." So the Internet of Things is computers gathering information about the physical world for themselves, by themselves, from sensors. And this is very different from the world getting information from people. Sensors only work well when they are connected to each other, and that data is made widely available so that computers can glean understanding of the real world and inform decisions. The value of the Internet of Things is based on the network effect of sensors and the ability to glean intelligence from combined data sets from connected things. And I know this is a wild concept, but this is what is happening, and the results are unmistakable. That an example was provided of one of IBM Watson's customers using this data-driven result with their machines connected by sensors. Unplanned outages were reduced by half. Maintenance costs were reduced by a quarter. Repair times were reduced by 12%. Inventories were reduced by half, and capital investment was reduced by 3 to 5%, because when the machine can tell you, because of a flux in data, that a failure is about to occur, you can stop and service it, so you're servicing the machine rather than having a more costly repair. This is the future of manufacturing. And again, to talk about the data that's coming from sensors, the difference between analytics and machine learning. Analytics are procedures to condense large amounts of data into human understandable information. Machine learning utilizes self-learning and automated recalibration based on changes in data to provide better predictions and outcomes. And I know you're thinking the same thing that I'm thinking. Hal, open the pod bay doors. We're not there yet, but it really is science fiction-like in realizing the real-world benefits that can be derived from these very robust analytical systems of continuous data analysis. So the Internet of Things will drive efficiency in the utilization of assets, this is especially valuable in asset-intensive industries like manufacturing. This will drive asset performance and health, increasing throughput, quality, and on-time delivery, that the activities of purchasing, production, packaging, and delivery are all brought together in a unified, overarching process, yielding more insight into root causes of failures and detection of problems before they happen, providing more insights, personalization, and synchronization. So this is the future that is coming for us whether we like it or not. And what that means is that those parts of Pennsylvania that are cut off from that level of connectivity are not going to be able to experience the value-added job creation, family-paying wages of modern manufacturing. So I don't pretend to have any of the answers, but this is the data that I have that I wanted to share with you that I thought was important for the context of this conversation.
Thank you very much. Mr. Matz? Mr. Carrick?
Thank you for having me here today. Thank you, Joe Pittman, for asking me to come. I'm kind of where Commissioner Ruddick is at. I've been working on this for a long time. I'm glad to see that you're here in our neck of the woods to hear what is going on at the grassroots level. Matter of fact, me and Rod had traveled to Harrisburg together back then in order to try and get some money to come back here and get broadband interconnection. Hearing a lot of the same things, listening to the different industry folks, different leaders here that I heard 16 years ago. Same barriers as technology is changing, so let's wait to see what new technologies there's going to be out there. Pole attachments, funding. I can tell you pole attachments is not the barrier as to why Verizon, Comcast, anybody is not putting broadband out in rural America. I'd be willing to talk to any provider out there to come up with a way to work with pole attachments if they're going to serve my members. So the only thing I would caution is any type of changes that would occur with pole attachments, that there should be a tie-in, that if there is going to be any changes, they need to serve everybody through those miles that they go. Because I've seen this before where there will be regulation changes. There will be discussions of trying to get regulation that's pro one entity and against another entity, only for those rural members to still not be served. So if there are going to be changes, I think the vast majority of the pole owners out there are willing to discuss it as long as the folks, all folks get served in between. Couple other things to discuss that we haven't mentioned here that from electric distribution standpoint is electric vehicles, smart homes, and load management is becoming extremely important, especially when you see the nuclear industry coming under siege as far as nuclear production starting to close. We're going to have to manage the grid much, much better. Broadband at all levels will help us accomplish that. And electric vehicles are going to come to the rural areas eventually, and broadband helps manage that as well. Give a couple examples of what we're running into from the grassroots level, because I feel that I have a unique perspective. I started out in Pittsburgh working for large companies. I had broadband in the late 1990s. I now live in Murraysville, which is a suburb of Pittsburgh, and I've served the great rural folks of Cambria County, Indiana County, and the 7 surrounding counties for 18 years working for REA Energy. I have an employee that works for me. She is right outside of Evansburg. She built a house, only to find out she doesn't have internet. She's about 4 miles outside of Evansburg. She's 24 years old. If this is telling you how important it is for our younger folks, she found out that Comcast would charge $4,000 to get cable to her house. She paid it, gladly paid it. She has everything connected to her house. I'm also on the Chamber of Commerce board. An example of Chamber of Commerce is we had an entity from a business from Chicago located right outside of Indiana. They had found out that they don't have broadband. So when you draw a business from Chicago here and then they find out that there's not broadband right outside of the borough, guess what? There's nobody else from Chicago coming here, and they may not stay. A couple other things that I'd heard that I want to kind of contrast is the slow adoption of broadband in rural areas. Rural electric cooperatives have kind of already seen this before back in the 1930s, 1940s when we started. There was this new technology, electricity, that a lot of farmers and rural folks didn't have. And there was also investor-owned utilities that didn't want to go to those areas because the dollars and cents didn't work out. So these not-for-profit entities called cooperatives got started, and from a grassroots level, they made it work, they got it done. They went past a lot of farms, and a lot of those farms, I don't need electric, I've been doing this for years, I got a mule, I got a horse, we can make it work. The electric cooperatives went out and sold it, okay? So they went out, they taught, back in those days, they taught the female of the house about the different electric appliances that are there. They taught the folks that are working the animals or working the fields the different advantages of having electric. And from there, a bunch of ingenuity came out, a bunch of new technology came out, and of course, a lot more tax revenues and things like that come along. So we do focus a little bit more on the costs, and make no mistake, there does need to be some seed funding. To give an example, REA Energy did do a feasibility study. We are actively looking at trying to come up with some type of solution for Indiana, Cambria counties, and the parts around the county that we serve. So roughly, if you were going to do fiber to the 23,000 homes that we service and businesses, you're probably looking upwards of anywhere from $90 to $100 million. However, if you run a grid like an electric grid, you understand that you don't need to necessarily go out and do complete fiber. You can go out and look at a fiber fixed wireless hybrid, which gets those costs down maybe to the $60 million level, maybe in 50. That's a lot of money for a company our size, but we also realize that we're not going to get all of that. If there's a certain amount of seed money that now all of a sudden makes it, okay, this makes sense, we can go ahead and do that. And then from there we manage it. So as technology comes out and we have to expand bandwidth, we replace the fixed wireless with fiber. No different than what we did with the electric side. The electric conductors that we put in 1940s obviously changed. Technology changed throughout the years, so as that changed, we rebuilt our system and made it more robust. No different than what happens with broadband. And the perspective I'd like to bring is, I'm in the business of putting poles in the ground, stringing, conductoring. Electric is more expensive to run than fiber, telephone, or anything like that. And I think that rural folks, because they have to do so much with so little, are the most ingenious people that are out there. And they truly have to squeeze water out of a rock. And I think that the adoption rate would be very high once this gets out there and once you have a local entity such as ourselves sell the benefits of what internet can bring to the area. And we also have a demographic issue in the state and in the rural area, and that it's a very aging demographic. And you want somebody to be able to replace that demographic. The state overall has lost population. Indiana and Cambria County has lost population. As that demographic goes away, you want to replace that. That is not going to be replaced with the younger folks if there is not some type of broadband access that is there. And we don't want to be behind the curve. You want to stay ahead of the curve. So we want to have that broadband in place before it's too late, because once people move out of the area, it's hard to draw them back in. And as far as one of the folks had mentioned about mini cell towers, you still need fiber for that. So if you put mini cell towers throughout rural areas, you still have to have fiber in those areas. That cost is still going to be there. I think looking at a business structure in addition to the costs is also most important. Cooperatives are a not-for-profit business entity that answers to its membership. So when the membership's local, you're going to cater to the needs of that membership. That is why electric cooperatives, which there's 942 throughout the United States, has been very successful, because we are answerable directly to our member. It is truly a local entity that will fit the needs of what its members want.
Thank you very much,
You're
Mr.
welcome.
Carrick. Mr. Matz.
Sorry for putting myself last, but there was a lot of questions came up, so thank you all for allowing me to testify here, senators and representatives. You're probably wondering why a local development district or an entity like us are involved in broadband. In 1994, our commissioners that sit on our board actually tasked us with starting an internet service. Because back then, you were calling CompuServe, you're calling into State College, Altoona, Erie, so you're paying long distance for your internet. So at the time, they took on this initiative and they actually established the first local ISP in the north central region of the state. So we've been in existence for about 25 years. We've gone through a lot of different reiterations. We started out with dial-up. Thank God that's gone. Listen to those modems in the morning when you come in because they're all hung up and squealing at you. We partnered with Windstream to do DSL, which Windstream promptly squeezed us out of the business because we had to buy circuits from them that they would go and then contact our customers and sell the circuits for less. So they squeezed us out of that business, which was okay. At that point, we actually worked with a local fiber provider that needed somewhere to house their southern head end. So we volunteered our building to get fiber. For the first 15 years of our business, we leased T1s to Altoona. Let me tell you, when that bill comes in at the end of the month, it's not very nice, because that's a lot of money. Now we're buying hundreds of meg of internet at the same price as what we were buying, 4 or 5 meg of internet. So we've been at it quite a while. I came to North Central in 2000. I had a wireless background. So at that point, we started building a hybrid network. The state was switching over to the 911 addressing, which we were tasked with doing that in our area. So we got one grant for $1 million from PennDOT to interconnect 6 county seats to pass 911 data so they have all the addressing. So we built one tower and connected 6 counties with $1 million, which was actually a pretty good feat because $1 million doesn't go very far in that. In 2000, buying the equipment, you're looking at $15,000 or $20,000 for a communication radio. I'm buying the same types of radios now for under $500. So the cost has come way down. So that all worked out well. It all took off. And then the state police, which somebody brought up the money the state police spent, and we're unhappy with that. And true, they were actually sold a bill of goods when they actually bought that system. But we coordinated with the state police at that point to leverage the assets that they were going to have. So we leveraged the towers in 6 counties that the state police were going to build. And we got an agreement with them that we could use them for 15 years with renewing 15-year contracts after that. So a couple of the sites, we actually have more equipment than the state police have on them. So at that point, we were able to serve the municipalities, the different areas around. I know Indiana County was talking about the 911 towers that they built. We actually made an agreement with all the counties in our area that we can use the 911 towers, so we can extend our network. So we've interconnected the state. And the reason that our system seems to work is we have partnerships. We can't do it on our own. Nobody can do it on their own. We've forged partnerships with entities that are hard to forge partnerships with. State Police, Game Commission, DCNR, plus locals, and also all the municipalities. And I know everybody has the issue with schools. My daughter has issued a laptop at school. We actually have friends that come over just about every night to finish their homework because they don't have broadband at home. And that's a shame that you do your homework, or they go to McDonald's, they go to the library. Some of the remote clinics that are out there, those clinics will spend tens of thousands of dollars to get fiber connection to that clinic because they have to be able to talk to other doctors. They have to be able to do all their billing. So it's hard for these areas to build out these little clinics when they can't get affordable broadband, when they're saddled with doing it all themselves. So over the years, we've built a hybrid network. Our network is based on fiber and wireless. It's a fixed wireless systems. We have wireless communication shots that are over 25 miles long. And I'm replacing the last one on Friday that's been running for 20 years. We're taking down the antennas and replacing all the systems. So we got a 20-year life out of that system. This is a prime area for it if he has a tower that's that close. We worked with the state police and DCNR to get internet to Cook Forest. I'm sure everybody knows where Cook Forest is. Mm-hmm. Cook Forest has the same coverage they do here. Throw your phone in the river and watch it float down the river. That's all you can do with it. But millennials and everybody, they want to be able to post where they're at. If they're in the middle of the woods and they see a bear, they want to post it. Why can't we make that accessible to them? So we retrofit the 80-year-old fire tower with 2 solar panels and put a solar system in, and we broadcast 11 miles into that site. And now the Gateway Lodge, Macbeth Cabins, and Pale Whale have internet. We also have a couple of Wi-Fi hotspots up. We've notified the ambulance departments and stuff that come through there. If they stop at the ranger station, they can do a Wi-Fi call to the hospital, tell them where they're at, because there is no communication there. We've also worked with a new business in that area in a town called Volwinkle, which is right outside of there. It is a beautiful barn that they built to do weddings. He would like to be able to offer to the people, they could stream their wedding if family members can't make it. They will be online next week. I leveraged an individual locally there that had a tower on his property, and I leveraged the use of his tower. He will supply me electricity and allow me to use it if I give him internet. That's a pretty good trade-off. We actually we have sites in 11 counties in Pennsylvania now. We're as far out as Mahoopany, which is almost in New Jersey. We're almost in New York, and actually most of these sites I've never seen. I have my tower crews trained well enough I can give them equipment, send them on their way. They can call me, I can remotely manage everything, and we can set it up. The other business that we're big into is well sites. How often you go past, you're in the middle of nowhere, you go past a well site and it says if you hear noise or anything, call 911. Nice try, you're not gonna call 911. You're gonna be 45 minutes away going, there's a well somewhere out here that's got a leak. That's no help. So we supply internet to some of the well sites. One of them is a Pennsylvania company, Pennsylvania General Energy out of Warren. That's one of our biggest customers. We're also working with Tri-County Electric on their project. They're going to spend about $77 million to do about 3 counties worth of broadband. And they've leveraged every fund possible to get this done. The nice thing is it's self-serving to them because they're going to put smart meters in, they're going to put smart grid in. So while I'm at your house putting your fiber in and giving you a smart meter, would you like to buy internet? Like he was talking, they can educate the customer while they're out there. I bet you they get a 90% take rate because you're actually interacting with the people. Not like some of the big companies say, hey, we have internet in your area. What's that mean to me? Nobody's come and talked to me about it. Pole attachments. Some of the bigger electric companies, I think they're looking at pole attachments as supplemental income. They're actually making money on pole attachments. I've seen pole attachments that are $100 and I've seen them $8,000. So if you have 25 poles at $8,000, are you gonna put fiber in? No. I was looking at doing fiber to a business in Center County. In Elk County, I could build it for about $25,000. Center County is gonna be $50 because of pole attachments. That's out of the question, you can't do it. So we build them with wireless communications and we try to do it more effectively than we can. Hopefully that's answered some of your questions that you may have had, and we're open for discussion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Matz. Senator Pittman.
Thank you. Very quickly, Chad, you mentioned you have 23,000 customers, estimated a cost of about $100 million to service those customers. You know, it's one thing to have access or the ability to access if the price is right, and there's another situation where you just don't have the ability to access. Have you run the numbers in terms of what your customer base is willing to pay, what you could carry of that $100 million? I mean, my back of the envelope numbers were that this was about a $5,000 per customer cost.
Yeah, we're in the process of doing surveying right now, but with most of the surveying, I mean, we had an outside firm do that, the firm that did the feasibility study. And of course, just like anything, they come up with a range of about $55 to upwards of even $70 as far as where folks are willing to pay in order to get 25 megabyte of service. Because if you have nothing, something's better than nothing. And 25 sounds really good, but 25 is actually kind of getting at the bottom of what high capacity broadband is. It's now starting to get up to 100. But if you don't have it, 25 is, you know, like a dream come true. So if you don't have, the folks are definitely willing to pay upwards of that level.
Your comment about pole attachments, what do you charge as REA?
I can't give, because we have probably 12 different contracts. You know,
Okay.
so you know, some of the discussions, I can only talk about cooperatives, and especially in particular REA Energy. We're nowhere near what this gentleman has said. That actually is scary.
We've actually worked with a co-op about getting poles, and the co-ops are great to work with. I mean, they're more willing to work with you. The big companies are bigger than everybody, so they don't care. They don't care if you use their pole or not. I know the REAs of that are very, very easy to work with.
Yeah. So we're nowhere near that. I agree. We're cost-based, you know. So since we're not for profit, whatever the cost is, plus we have to maintain margins per our regulation through borrowing from the federal government. That's all we do. We don't do anything above that. And I think that business model is what works best in a rural type of setting like this. Even if, in my opinion, you know, for-profit companies, even if they are given a large share of money to get things started, they're still going to go to the area that has 20 people per mile. I want to serve the areas where there's 6 people per mile. That's true of the rural areas of Pennsylvania. You know, if you're from Pittsburgh or Philadelphia, you think Altoona is rural, you think Indiana Borough is rural. For us, as you know, that's not rural. What's rural is the points in between where you might even get down to 1 or 2 people per mile. So luckily for REA Energy, you can have a mix of fiber and wireless, and that's where I think that having to answer to local folks like cooperatives do, you're going to come up with a system or a solution that works best for your people that you answer to. So there is no cookie cutter approach. You can't just do all fixed wireless or all fiber. In some areas you might have to do all fiber, you know, but if you get down to the southeast region of Pennsylvania, you could definitely have a lot of fixed wireless. So that's where I think trying to do this from a command and control aspect doesn't work, and that's why I think that the co-op model or some derivative of a co-op model works, because now you're doing it at the local level. You know, you're doing it at the grassroots level. Your representatives are coming from that area, so they have a vested interest in making sure those dollars they get works.
Thank you. Senator Hutchinson.
Thank you. I'm dovetailing also on Senator Pittman's questioning, because I've long believed that the electric cooperatives model is the best way to get coverage into rural areas. But I guess I'm particularly curious to hear of other barriers that maybe legal barriers. You know, I know you are established under a federal legislation, but there may be other barriers that, other than cost, which is of course in everyone's discussion. But are there other things that we as a General Assembly or maybe our federal legislators can do to remove other barriers that keep you from being able to advance rural broadband initiatives? Do any come to mind as we sit here?
Probably the biggest barrier would be easements. You know, as gas companies have started to proliferate through the Commonwealth, people have become more attentive to their property. And so now it used to be that we could go through and do things, and people would offer us lemonade, you know, as we were working. Now it's different. Hey, what are you doing? There's definitely more tension there. So that definitely can be a barrier, because that can really slow things up. I would actually also caution having all pole attachment issues go to a judge, or I couldn't hear exactly what he said, and here's why. I don't even get involved in pole attachment disputes. The gentlemen that are out on the street, you know, the engineer from Verizon, the engineer from REA Energy, guess what? That's who works it out. Hey, I'll do this, you do that, and we're done. Because they got to get it done. You know, their job is to get it done. That's real. That's what's real. What isn't real is, hey, every time there's a little dispute, we're going to take 6 months to figure this thing out. And that probably is not going to change. The vast majority of those are going to happen there. But probably in not today's day and age, I would say when you get to easements, that seems to be something that is getting more and more difficult to deal with.
No, you have a lot of easements, obviously. I'm assuming you can use use that same, I mean, your contracts are written such that you
It's
can
for
use those?
Electric lines and communications
Okay.
for your grid.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Representative Dash.
Thank you, Senator Hill. All three of you brought up some great stuff. Dave, you mentioned about the Internet of Things. I was down in Pittsburgh at their old Votech building, and they and Duquesne University, there are things that are going on down there where all those little components and sensors are talking to one another, and it's helping them to gain some tremendous efficiencies with just the environments within the facilities. It's driving the costs down for their utility costs and that sort of thing. And it's happening in the manufacturing sector as well. And the need to have, well, Ed had touched on the fact that he can reach out to places he's never been yet. And his guys set it up, and he can reach out there and tell what's going on with his equipment on the poles. That goes very directly to the need. And both Chad and Ed, I'm proud of where we come from here in rural Pennsylvania, because Chad, you touched on it, how we think outside the box, and we make, I tell my township supervisors all the time, they know how to make a nickel scream. But those examples of where you guys have already started with the REA reaching out, are there any other examples of where you're doing that right now? And what are some of the other roadblocks you see? And Ed, if you could expand on a few other things, it was just like Cook Forest, the fire tower, that was a boon to the businesses that are there.
Correct.
And I was here with Commissioner Ruddock when the tower went in up here on top of the hill. They've also got the one in Banks Township. It's those types of assets. You've done a fantastic job of inventorying that, and I'd like you to touch, if you could, on how you've done that inventory and who you brought into the sphere of getting that information to you.
Actually, we've applied for a grant to do a more extensive, we're calling it a vertical asset inventory with a broadband component to it. The idea is the state of Virginia did a vertical asset study, and it's a map you can go to, and you can find every tower that's in the state. Tells you who owns it, where it's located, all the information you need to know about it. So we applied for an EDA grant, and it looks pretty good, like we're going to get the EDA grant, that we are going to survey our 6 counties, get every vertical asset. We're going to go a step further. We're going to look for silos, water tanks, taller buildings, anything that sticks above the horizon. I've already started working with some of the municipalities that have water tanks already, because there's electric there, and that's all that I need. So that vertical asset, and then what we're going to do for a broadband study, we're going to work with every school district in our area as a senior project. We're going to have an ESRI Survey 123 site where they'll go home, they'll log into the site, capture all their information of where they're at. They will go to a designated speed test site and capture that speed test and put it into this, and we will map it. And that will give us a pretty granular idea of where it's at. Year 2, we'll open that up to more people to do the broadband study and to find more of the vertical assets. We think working with the schools is a great place to start, because you're going to find that's a great diversity of your counties where the schools are located. One of the things, I don't know if the people here in Indiana County know, that you have a huge amount of bandwidth in Indiana County. The university sits on the Penn-Ren network, and it's one of the hubs of the Penn-Ren network. They are trying to sell connections to that, but they will not do the last mile. We get back to who's going to do the last mile. Nobody wants to do the last mile. Why don't they want to do the last mile? I got to deal with the customer. I got to deal with people. I don't want to deal with people. I want to deal with equipment. So they don't want to do it because there's a lot of management involved in it. But Indiana County sits in a pretty good spot to actually leverage that Penn-Ren network. You can probably get bandwidth for a couple of dollars a meg if you're buying 100 meg or more. It's just getting it to where you need to go. I actually have their fiber map on, I have 3 companies' fiber maps, and I work exclusively with these fiber companies. It's partnerships. Get the partnerships, get into these rural areas, and we'll go into areas and we'll serve one business or one customer. That's our goal. We're out there to help. I had 2 businesses in Clearfield County. One sit in the middle of an industrial park on the wrong side of the railroad tracks. They couldn't get fiber because of the agreements to get across the railroad tracks. 3 years to get that agreement. They were my customer for 2 of those 3 years. They called me a couple weeks ago and said they want to cancel. They got fiber. Great. More power to you. I'm glad we all worked out. The other company is down lower than Interstate 80. Fiber's at the top of the hill. They can't afford $50,000 to pull the fiber. We did a wireless link for $2,000 to get them internet. So you got to look at, they're looking at it correctly. Like REA may pull a bunch of fiber, but they may have a 10-mile stretch that there's 2 customers. Can you do a wireless connection to get that big connection set up and save themselves a lot of money? Hopefully that covered some of the things that you'd like to know. And one of the other things, we got money from sales tax for a tower that we need to build in Cook's Forest. The taxes that they charge in hotel rooms, we got a grant off of that to build the tower. So you got to look for the grants everywhere. I don't want to get into grants because I hate the bureaucracy.
That might be a
grants.
topic for another hearing.
Real quick
Indeed.
on grants, an LDD should be allowed to apply for a pocket of money that they do local grants. Because the grants will take up to a year. I've either lost that customer, lost that area, or moved on to other projects. I don't have a year to wait for money to come in. We build projects in 2 to 3 weeks, so it would be nice if we could apply for a pot of money that if it meets certain requirements, we can give $2,000 or $3,000 towards a project.
Thank you. If I can, one last question before we wrap everything up. Workforce development. We know that workforce development is a huge issue for manufacturing, not just having facilities that are connected to the internet, but the workforce who can work in those facilities. One of the things that I'm hearing from other states is that as they make investments into high-speed internet and connectivity, that the workers that are needed to make these connections happen are limited. That many of these people are the same people that electric cooperatives and energy companies use for their connections as well, and that it's hard to find the workers with the skills to the point where they're offering huge financial incentives, $200 a day per diems for line workers to come and work, much like we saw initially with the advent of the Marcellus Shale, where people were making hundreds of thousands of dollars and had to live in campers because they couldn't find homes, or, you know. Are you hearing the same thing about our workforce, and do you have any thoughts on what we need to do to incentivize workforce development to have the workforce needed for this next round of our industrial revolution?
Well, sure, I'll take a stab at that, and certainly, Senator, you're absolutely right that the workforce challenge is the #1 issue facing our employers today, and it's a combination of a number of things. It's it's demography, it's misplaced priorities where for too long that we've sort of stigmatized any choice that a student might make other than after completing high school pursuing a 4-year undergraduate degree, and that there are an awful lot of high-paying, family-sustaining jobs in the skilled trades and manufacturing that go wanting. And I think it's an unhealthy sign for our society that we don't honor all kinds of work. As we're alluding to here in the broadband discussion, there are all kinds of systems, and in many cases that they're invisible, but they uphold our modern quality of life, and we would all be in really bad trouble if we had to live without any of those systems. So the workforce challenge is the most thorny and multifaceted one that you face. I do not envy you folks the work that's going to be necessary. That along with being an education issue, it's also it's a criminal justice issue and a corrections reform issue that many of our fellow Pennsylvanians who are paying a debt to society or who have just emerged from being incarcerated, we need their skills. We need the contribution that they may be able to make to the broader well-being. And of course, also it's better for them as individual people to be able to have that dignity of work. I mean, it's an addictions issue, you know, as we all know, with the opioid crisis and so many people incapacitated and unable to be productive. I want to sound the alarm about recreational marijuana. In manufacturing facilities, you have a lot of really consequential things happening. Heavy equipment, bladed instruments, extreme temperatures, high voltage, chemical reactions. All of our licenses and permits and all the things that allow us to lawfully operate depend on a safe workplace. And that, you know, this is why people get drug tested, and this is why people who can't test clean can't get hired, because we can't have the risk of having them in that kind of industrial environment. I'm very concerned with because from the view of manufacturers, that pool of potential new hires isn't big enough to begin with. And then if you lose, you know, some significant percentage, whether it's a quarter or a third, I don't know, to people who either take the test and fail it, or people who walk away from their applications when they're told that they have to get tested, it's a real crisis. And at the very least, we shouldn't make it worse by mass commercializing recreational marijuana the way that we have seen it in places like Colorado. Just one last thing. Our workforce job training program network is a jumble. It is dozens of different programs across multiple cabinet departments, and it basically makes no sense. I would point you to the Auditor General's recent review of those programs. One of the options that's available, and I said this to Governor Wolf, to petition the federal government for a waiver that we could sort of suspend the rules regarding these programs, because it's federal and state taxpayer money, and the last time I checked, it was like $1.6 billion. I'm sure it's a lot higher since. So I mean, it's a significant amount of money, but everything is locked into its own silo. So you can have a high-performing program that's oversubscribed, and you can't put anybody else in that program. Other programs that don't work very well, and there's money left over, but you can't move the money from the program that doesn't work to the one that does. In the state of Indiana, they have successfully received that waiver from the federal government, and so they're able to start doing this work to rationalize a system that works better for them. So the request has to go to the federal government from the state executive. So as you're interacting with Governor Wolf, I would say please ask him to make that request of Washington.
Thank you.
Yeah, from our end, we searched for a lineman for a year and a half and couldn't get one, nationwide search. So we decided to switch gears and start our own apprenticeship program at REA Energy. And really the advantage of going into an apprenticeship program with a company such as REA Energy is we pay them while they learn. So there is no student debt whatsoever coming out of that. So it's, they're coming out hundreds of thousands of dollars ahead. But I think that there's almost like, and if there's any IUP folks here, they may take us the wrong way, but there's a little bit of an overselling of going to college, because the blue collar jobs pay just as well, if not better, nowadays. So a lot of folks just think that the next step is going to college, and they don't necessarily know the other opportunities that are out there. So we have linemen, we have HVAC technicians, and we have electrical contractors, and that has become difficult to hire. So we start our own apprenticeship programs. I will tell you, all the schooling is online. So to become a lineman, you have to go online to complete that we facilitate for our candidates. So when they move here from outside the area, we actually tell them where to move, so they do have broadband access. Unfortunately, some of it's not on my territory. But even more recently, we're finding it hard to find office staff in particular. So there is a lack of students that are coming out ready for work.
Well, and thank you. The last thing we want to do is make massive investments in deploying this essential infrastructure and find out that we don't have a workforce who can do the work that needs to be done. So thank you, gentlemen. Thank you so much. I would like to thank everyone for participating in the first of our 4 hearings on this topic, and I would again like to thank Senator Pittman for hosting us here in beautiful Indiana County. I now recess the Senate Communications and Technology Committee until the call of the chair. Thank you very much.